Hello and welcome to the CBB Supershow, brought to you by the FTN Network. I'm your host, Walt Waddell, aka Deuce85, and as you can see on your screen, co-pilot and co-host tonight is going to be the great prop aficionado and just overall good guy to know, Mike Cutri. He is the man. Thanks for joining us tonight, Mike. I know that you're a busy guy, and I always go on so late. The other night, I was talking about bracket narratives till like 5 a.m. on the East Coast, and people were hanging out with me. So I'm truly, truly blessed to have you here with us, and I'm excited to talk about this 16-game slate with you tonight.
One more sleep. One more sleep. One more sleep. We have to follow tradition, Walt. Me and you have to chop it up on the eve of Christmas or of opening day of March Madness. So, I'm excited. It's been a long few days. All the days kind of blended together with the lack of sleep. I'm sure you are experiencing the same thing. But this is why we do it. So, I'm excited to talk some hoops with you as always.
Sure. And the chat over there is lively. I'm just going to put this one on the board here. It says Cutri's bracket is already dead. Picking against the Wolfpack, you simply hate to see it. It's one of our resident Wolfpack fans there. All right. Appreciate everybody who's tuning in live here. Let people start to trickle in. If you are new to the program, just to remind others that are watching as veterans, we go game by game, covering the DFS slate in full, talking about any overpriced, underpriced options, as well as any of our favorite sneaks. All of that good stuff. We will go through each game, answering questions as you have them. At the very end, we'll talk about any cores, 2 or 3 guys that we're just going to be heavily invested in. A little bit of prize picks talks, any betting opportunities. And then since we got the prop master here, I don't want him to give up all the secret sauce here, for free or anything, but definitely get your take on maybe 1-2 props that you feel very, very good at, giving people there at the Super Show a little of that goodness. There is a bunch of stuff, a lot of activity. Our FTN Daily DFS Discord will be popping, starting lineups, injury news, anything at all will be posted in those Discords as we go. And then over in the FTN Bets Discord, where Mike Randall and Mike Cutri are, they post their plays and everybody tilts just the same as they do in the DFS room. Just a very fun environment indeed. We have a ton to talk about. I don't want to be too long-winded. I have a habit of having Mike on the show, and then just, I just can't help myself. I continue to just blab on and on. So we're going to just jump right in here. Before we do, I want to ask everybody that's watching live now, please hit that like button. I know I've been begging for those likes lately, but that engagement, those impressions you've been giving to the Super Show have given us a ton of additional viewers and extra subs. It has been a fun week. We are doing a ton of content, and it is not anywhere close to being over. Tomorrow is going to be a long one, too. I see Raz in the chat who's going to be joining us tomorrow. Lots of good guys in the industry hanging out with us this week. All right, let's get into this slate. It's a beast. It's a bear, 16 games. And if you look over at the contest, those of you who, say the stuff like 2K to first, I don't get out of bed for that. This is the slate for you. You have a $25K to first tournament in the $20 level. There's 5,800 people in that one. There's a $5 tournament that is $1K to first. And then, of course, the 222, which is $10K to first, and a 44, which is $3K to first. Lots of opportunities, lots of fun things. 16-game slate. If you brick out early, no fear. There's a 4-game afternoon as they broke it up. And then there's, of course, the 8-game night slate. So still plenty of opportunities to play there if you fizzle out. There's the Mania going on there. Our guy Mike representing plenty of other subs in the FTNs. We'll be cheering those guys on and everything for that head-to-head bracket. And of course, the $64 and $6.40, very clever survivors. They did make an appearance, a reemergence this year. So definitely would recommend people getting a chance to do that. Had some questions about how you play that. Treat it like a 50-50 for the first day or two. Last day is when you want to take those GPP type of builds and try to win the thing. All right, let's get into it. Game number 1, we're going to talk about the very controversial, Michigan State Spartans, at least in our Discord, taking on Mississippi State. It's a total of 130.5, and Michigan State is favored by 1. Your prototypical 8-9 matchup here. A lot of people thought Spartans shouldn't have been in. This will be their opportunity to prove so. Mississippi State has some nice DFS options. Since it's our first time talking together for a while, let's have you start us off.
Well, I appreciate that, Walt. So I'll try to be brief since we have 16 games to go through. But like you said, the total is 130.5, which was a little lower than I thought it was going to end up at, which may be a little telling that this could be more of a defensive struggle than we thought. And Michigan State's 1-point favorite. I think this game can go either way. What it's really going to come down to is shot making from the perimeter, and you have 2 incredible shot makers on both sides, with Tyson Walker for Sparty and Josh Hubbard, the freshman phenom we've seen hit some ridiculous shots down the stretch in close games. From a DFS perspective, I do think both of those guys are viable, probably more GPP plays than main builds, just because I do think this is going to be a close game throughout, and I do think that shot making is going to translate to points in the final 8 minutes of the game. So I am looking at those 2. I have interest in those 2. But further down, if you're looking for main team builds, there are 2 guys in this game that I do have interest and do have on my board. Number 1 is Tolu Smith for Mississippi State. I know he's been, a little inconsistent all year. He came off the injury, but he's just way too cheap for his rates and for his talent level. And we have seen the Spartans over the last, 2, 3, 4 years really struggle to defend the post. I do think that's Mississippi State's advantage in this game, is that they are much stronger on the interior, and I think they're going to try to use Tolu as much as they can in this matchup. So Tolu Smith at 6,800 is someone I'm looking at. And then on the Sparty side, I know A.J. Hoggart has been very inconsistent and has not lived up to his lofty expectations this year or last year after a really strong sophomore season. But that said, Hoggart does come to play in when the lights are bright and when it's time to shine. We saw him in the tournament games last year really show up and have really, really strong fantasy performances. It's March. It's tournament time. Izzo's their coach. I am still confident in Hoggart's ability, even though he has faltered down the stretch. But at 6,700, with his ability to fill up the stat sheet, I think he's someone that could be sneaky to look at 6,700 and can put up a big fantasy score. So
and say what you will about Sparty. They looking at this matchup individually, the whole cliche, and it's true. Guards win in March, and the veteran guards that the Spartans have, like Hoggart, like Walker, even Akins to a degree, they should be able to do some things here. And price wise, they're all relatively cheap. Even the 7-7 on Walker, that doesn't feel like, I know looking at his logs, maybe it feels a little bit high before the Survivor 50-50. It just seems like this is a spot where he wouldn't break out, right? Playing 35 plus minutes. He just seems ultra safe to me. Pricing is a little bit tighter on this slate. There are some spots we're going to be able to go, but Walker to me feels like that one of those safer plays. If you could ever find a safe play in basketball lately, the conference tournament week really challenged the idea of safety. But I do like the call there on Hoggart. I always love Malik Hall. He's my guy, but I can't play 7-1 for him. Akins to me at 5-4. I think if we are going to get big minutes from him, he played just the 24 there against Purdue, but typically we see him play around 30, 32. That's usually going to be enough because of his shot volume. We don't necessarily see a lot of secondary stats from him, although he's been rebounding pretty well lately, but that 5-4 price on Akins stood out to me. I love the Tolu Smith call. You're already seeing some Never Tolu hashtags in the chat. That is a very tilting player for a lot of our subs in the community. I love Tolu Smith always. I know he can be frustrating, but you're right. 6'8", it's just way too cheap. His upside is massive. That's the type of play I would want to be looking at in large field for sure. Maybe a little bit nerve-wracking to use him in your main or in Survivor, but I don't know that the Spartans have that front court presence to be able to get him into foul trouble. And without foul trouble, I would suspect 30 plus minutes. So I'm right there with you. I'm interested to see how our guy, Josh Hubbard, performs against these veteran guards as well. But other than those few pieces, I'm definitely not looking at too much else. All right, we're going to move right along here. Duquesne versus BYU. BYU a 10-point favorite, total of 142. Starting us out here, BYU. They have a very deep rotation. It has caused most of their prices to be relatively cheap, but it's because all of the kind of cannibalization that is happening has watered down a lot of these stats, like Jackson Robinson, who has shown flashes and been very good, He's splitting minutes with Hall, Spencer Johnson. It's just really caused most of these guys to be playing 25 to 30 minutes. We're not seeing those high upside type of place. We did see earlier a report about Atiki not warming up, not practicing. I know he doesn't play a whole lot of minutes anyways, but also Ali Khalifa, he's been dealing with an ankle issue. So that's another potential front court player that may not be available. What that means is the always high upside, high fantasy point per minute player, Fousseyni Traore, has to be in least consideration. He's been playing so well lately that it's caused his price to go up here. I was hoping before the slate came out that we'd get like that mid 5, 6K range. Didn't really think it was going to happen, but coming out at 7K definitely makes it a little bit tougher. This is a player who truly only needs about 20 minutes with his rates to pay off still. But if we're going to have Khalifa missing and Tricky missing, that means that 25, 26 minute mark is realistic for him. This is a game that does look to be, on the Duquesne side, at least a little bit ugly in terms of shot making and rebounding upside. And I think Traore could be looking at a double-double here. Definitely a guy that I want to use in some of those large field GPPs because I think people will be a little bit worried about paying that 7K price point for him. As far as anyone else, there's going to be some props that I'm looking at on BYU we'll talk about later. But the prices, again, Noah Waterman, he's only 5'8". Perhaps he gets closer to 30 minutes without Khalifa. We have seen Richie Sanders play multiple positions. He's kind of typically stuck in those low 20 to 22-minute range, but there is a little bit of upside there for more. And overall, I keep waiting for the Trevin Knell game, who has shown in the past to be a big-time shot maker and an overall good DFS option. Missed some games. Now he's come back. We've seen him play pretty well against TCU. He had one of his better games. The shot volume is definitely there. Hasn't quite looked right just yet, but he's so cheap to me at 5-1 that I have definitive interest there in Trevin Knell. Haven't decided if that's going to be a main team play for me just yet, and I certainly don't want to be stacking BYU first thing, but I do think that they're going to end up covering that 10 and winning comfortably. This will be a good chance for guys like Trevin Knell to get going once again. On the Duquesne side, I just have a lot of difficulty getting to any of these guys against BYU. I think it's pretty brutal overall. You do get the Fousseyni versus Fousseyni matchup if you want it. Drame is really, really good. His experience here in tournament type of games, only 5'5". He was extreme chalk in that A10 slate against VCU. I don't suspect that to be the case here, but he is only 5'5", and we know he has a safe amount of minutes, and he has strong overall rates to support using him. Does have to stay out of foul trouble, which isn't normally an issue for him, but going up against BYU, it is going to be very difficult to have any rebounding opportunities there against that front court, whether they're with or without Khalifa at all. So I'm probably not going to get there, but he is the play that stuck out to me the most as usable. We do have Trey Williams dealing with the shoulder issue, so he's not going to play. He's been in and out of the lineup for the last month or so of the season. That basically means Jake DeMichelle is going to be guaranteed his 25 to 30 minutes, which at 4.9, he's at least in consideration as a semi-value. And then you have pretty much, if you want to use Dusan Morehead and you're desperate, he's only 3.6. He's not going to play more than 15 to 20 minutes, but we see these types of stars and scrubs builds where people are very desperate to get in those pay-ups. Using somebody like Dusan, not the worst thing in the world. He's going to have to play. He's been starting 3.6, but he's just not going to get minutes to be that comfortable at 3.6, I suppose. More of a GPP play, certainly not a survivor look. What are you thinking about this one?
So 16 game slate. This is not a fantasy friendly environment. As you said before, BYU is very balanced, very deep. So those are the types of guys that you probably don't want to roster in a large slate. And on the Duquesne side, I mean, they're going to try to slow this game down as much as possible. And I don't think I have anybody in this game in my player pool. The only way I would be interested in anybody from this game is, like you said, if the two bigs on the BYU side are confirmed out. We have Traore sitting there at 7K who could get around 30 minutes. Then I think he's a live play. But other than that, this is a game I'm probably going to totally breeze over.
Yeah, and Scott says, and Aaron, we can do the double Fousseyni and triple Traore from the two Long Beach State Traore. So there you go. That could be the Bink lineup. All right, next game on the slate here, Akron versus Creighton. It is a total of 141. Creighton 12.5 point favorites. Now, before we get into the DFS part, I wanted to get your take here. It might be a little crazy. Talked about it on the Mean Street show the other day. Felt like Akron was, live here to cover for sure, but maybe even in a possibility that they pull the upset here. Do you feel like that might be the case with the way that Akron plays, getting physical with Creighton, maybe making them a little bit uncomfortable, or is that just kind of a lame take?
It's so funny that me and you are on the same page on a lot of this stuff, Walt, because I actually have a money line bet on Akron for
Let's
tomorrow,
go.
and we are locked in as Akron as a live dog in this spot, right?
Yeah.
I think Creighton as a 3 seed does show a lot of red flags as far as being an early exit candidate. They're one of those teams that are very 3-point reliant. I think they're 5th or 6th nationally in 3-point attempts at a game. So they're going to live and die by the 3, and that just opens up a lot of variance in the way that they can play. And then on the defensive side of the ball, they're the most conservative one of the more conservative defenses in the entire country. They don't foul. They play the super, super deep drop coverage. So if the Akron guards, so if Tribble and Ali can really operate against that drop coverage, they can find some success on offense. And we know the way they play. We saw them play that game against UCLA 2 years ago in the first round where it was in the 50s and they almost pulled it out. They're going to make this a very low possession game. If that's the type of game that they're going to force Creighton into, and Creighton's not hitting 3-pointers, they are a super, super live dog. So I like them at 12.5, and I like them on money line too.
Awesome. Yeah, no, for sure. It just seemed like a pretty bad matchup overall for Creighton. I'm seeing a lot of Elite 8, Final 4 runs for Creighton. I'm just I don't know if they're going to make it through there. Flipping to the DFS side here, having Ali back absolutely is a great thing. He's priced pretty reasonably at 6.1K. I definitely have interest there in him. Defends multiple positions. Looking at it overall, 24% usage rate. Does draw about 5.5 fouls per 40 and isn't necessarily a guy that we have to worry about getting into foul trouble himself. He's a pretty tall kid, 6'8", 6'9", too. So defends multiple positions, and we know he's going to be on the floor for 36, 37 minutes, possibly the entire way. So that price to me stuck out as being a little bit too low. I love Enrique Freeman. You'd mentioned they pushed UCLA a couple years ago. He was on that team. He had a fairly strong performance. I believe he had 16-8, something like that. Definitely a guy that if he stays out of any foul trouble against Kalkbrenner, he's going to be able to put up some huge numbers. We saw it against Ohio, 21 rebounds, kind of pops there, right? But I think he could very easily put up a minimum of 30 to 32 fantasy points, and that 8.4 to me, I almost thought he should have been priced at 9K, maybe even a little bit higher with the way that he typically plays. Granted, against MAC competition, it's a lot different going up against Creighton, but they're not going to fold. Akron has this experience, especially these guys have experience against these upper tier teams, and I don't think that they're going to be playing scared by any means. So I love Enrique Freeman too. Not sure if I'll be able to get to that price point, but the 6'1" of Ali is definitely where I'm going to be looking. On the Creighton side, it's always usually Baylor Shireman, Ryan Kalkbrenner, Trey Alexander, right? And throughout the season, I'm just taking whoever's cheapest. That's mainly what I've been doing. Ashworth, I know he's been coming along, the last month or two of the season. He's really looked a lot better. It seemed like he struggled a little bit going from a semi-alpha last year at Utah State to the 4th option, but he seems to have hit his stride and he's taken a lot of shots. So there's that. But he's not somebody that I like very much in this particular game. Trey Alexander does sit as the cheapest amongst their top 3. So he's the one I would look to, but I don't know. I just buying into this Akron team a lot. Not as if they're going to shut any of these guys down, but I don't think we're seeing these 35, 40, 45, 50-point games that we necessarily come to expect from these Creighton players, and paying up of almost 10K for Baylor Shireman, as good as he's been and all the tournament experience he has. That just seems like it's way too reckless for me to try to deal with. So I'm going to stick with the Akron side here with Ali as a main team play. Is there anybody else in this game that you might be looking at, or any different takes you have on Creighton?
No, I do agree with you. I do like Ali at 6,100. He's in a much different role than he was on Butler last year. What I'm really trying to figure out, Walt, is who is going to be the main ball handler against the drop coverage. I've been diving into the synergy metrics for the last few days, and it does look like Greg Tribble is the main pick and roll ball handler that Akron uses most of the time. But I also can see them trying to use Ali in that situation in the pick and roll and just utilize his size a little bit, because he's going to have to operate in the mid range. So I think Ali is a good play, because I do think he's going to have the opportunity to get into that mid range kind of space against Kalkbrenner's sitting down in the paint for the whole game on defense. But I also have interest in Greg Tribble at 4,400. He has put up multiple games over 20 fantasy points this year. He's going to play over 30 minutes. He's their primary ball handler. He's going to have Ashworth guarding him, which is, as we know, is probably the weaker defender on Creighton. So I think he's live for a value play at 4,400. On the Creighton side, like you said, in a tough matchup, in a slow-paced game, these guys are just way too high a price. If you want to play Trey Alexander at 8,500, that's fine. I'll probably have him on maybe 1 or 2 GPP teams, but that's really it. But for me, it's Ali, Greg Tribble, and that's really it from this game.
Yeah, Tribble is one of those values like you can use them and you can basically, feel okay about it, not super excited by any means, but like you just hope he gets you that, 3.5x, maybe to the 4x number there at minimum, and the pay up that you get from using him does the rest. So I don't mind that, especially the way that you broke down how that's going to be played out and who I'll be defended by. That could definitely work out. All right, moving on to a game that I'm actually looking forward to a lot, as much as you can be for a 20-point spread. Arizona versus Long Beach State, total over 163. Again, Arizona favored by 20. I was having a lot of discussions with people about this because I think a lot of times people look at the 15, 16 seeds when these DFS slates come out, and they just kind of tend to ignore them because, they're going to get blown out, or, they're not going to end up on optimal. But there's been several instances over the last couple of years where they have. Remember the Hartford team from a couple of years ago before they dropped out of D1. They actually had 2 players who ended up on the optimal because of how cheap they were. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking at this matchup and saying, yeah, Arizona's going to win. They're probably going to score over 90, over 100 points, but that means Long Beach State's going to score well over 75, 80 themselves. They're playing extremely free. Obviously Dan Monson, who started the Gonzaga craze over a million years ago, went to Minnesota, didn't work out. He's been at Long Beach State for quite a while. They let go of him, and the trend of firing coaches right before the conference tournaments, allowing them to stay and coach that tournament and then bow out after. Well, he didn't bow out because they won that conference tournament in the Big West champion. So now he's getting this opportunity. He had a hilarious interview yesterday talking about he's not going to be answering certain questions because he's working for free. So I like the way that their vibes are right now. This Long Beach State team, they play an extremely fast-paced, top 30 in tempo. We know Arizona plays at a fast pace. This is a team that is just going to be really, really what I believe to be super relaxed. Players to know, obviously, Marcus Teshonis, who has got Huskies purple still in his blood somewhere. And when you looked at the game against UC Davis, we had them on a slate. The Long Beach State stack was extremely good to us. Obviously, not necessarily preaching a stack here against Arizona, but they have some legitimate ballers on their team. Lucina Traore, Abubakar Traore, and Marcus Teshonis, mainly the 3 that I'm really looking at. And price-wise, yes, we're not getting them at super cheap discounts. The Hartford kids a couple of years ago, they were like 4.4 or 5K. They were a lot cheaper. But I do think somebody like Marcus Teshonis at 6'3" could potentially be sneaky because people are going to just write this off as hey, they're going to get blown out. What's he actually going to do? But this matchup, this pace, he's liable to take 20-plus shots. He's shown that in the past. Even when he was at the Huskies, we were all broken with our process. He was taking 15 to 20 shots when he was out there. This kid is wired to score. He's not going to offer a lot in terms of other stats, but he could very well put up a 30-piece here against Arizona, and I don't think it'll be a situation where those guys get pulled if it does get out of hand. So I'm very confident in Marcus Teshonis. I do like some GBP shares of guys like Lucina Traore and Abubakar. They're a little bit expensive, over 7K, but it's not as if they can't get there. And then on the Arizona side, this is where it gets tricky because I'm not one to really worry about blowouts during the regular season, especially in tournament settings. They do try, if you can get a kid a little bit of rest, we've seen coaches, they will do that, right? If it's in first round, we're going to be playing another game in 2 days, let's not wear out. So there's potential here for Arizona starters to lose some minutes. Not enough, I think, to matter, especially when we're talking about a total of 163, that I think they're going to go way over. I don't know if you have that take. We'll see in a second, but I think we're talking about a very high score here. Caleb Love sticks out. This is just like the perfect starting point for him at 7'6". All the people who talk trash, his performance in the Pac-12 tournament, it wasn't great. Obviously, they got bounced out by Oregon. A lot of people chirping, oh, here comes the bad version of Caleb Love. He hears it. Obviously, there is a potential matchup waiting down the line in North Carolina. I don't know how much he's going to look into that. I don't really worry about that part, but I do think he thinks about the way people talk about him, and getting off to a good start here in a game like this that's just perfect for his play style is going to be important and set the tone for the rest of the tournament. So I do believe Arizona allows, for lack of a better term, Caleb Love to cook. And I think he's going to be taking 15, 20 plus shots here, even in a big blowout scenario. The first half, I think, from Caleb Love's just going to be ridiculously good. And if you don't have him, it's going to feel bad. He may cool off in the second and let the foot off the gas, but that first half by Caleb Love tomorrow, trust me, it's going to be something very, very special. So I'm looking at him at 7-6, and I'm thinking that maybe people will be a little bit off this game overall just because of those implications with a 20-point spread. Other options, you have Omar Ballo. He's probably, for me, priced out 8-5. There's some physicality there with Long Beach State. He's playing extraordinarily well at the right time. I don't worry about him as far as being shut down by Long Beach State by any means, but I do think there's a little bit of an opportunity cost there that I'm maybe not willing to pay. You do get Keshad Johnson and Pele Larson under 7K, so those are both viable options if you want to use them. I don't really have that great of luck with Pele Larson. I haven't the course of his entire career. Keshad Johnson under 7K, I always have interest in. He's got tournament experience. We know how good he can be. I think his peripherals in this game can be very good, solid enough, and he has guard forward eligibility, so you have some flexibility there with where you can place him in your lineup. Now, if you want to play the blowout, then you can look at Jaden Bradley under 5K or perhaps KJ Lewis. This would be a good opportunity in the latter half of the second half for Arizona to get those guys some more minutes. It's not as if they're stiffs. They all played 18 to 22 minutes pretty consistently in competitive games at that. Lewis at 4.7 is the one that I'm looking at the most as a alt type of value. Would have preferred him to be cheaper, of course, but I do like these tighter pricing. It makes people think about things a lot, and KJ Lewis is the one that I think could be the sneakier value of the slate. I know I broke down the entire game there. We'll kind of switch off as we go since it's such a long slate. Is there anything you want to add there? Or what do you think about total wise and Caleb Love? Is he somebody that you're kind of looking at?
Yeah, Walt, so you hit the nail right on the head. So total of 163, 164, highest total on the slate. So you have to have some exposure to this game. I actually do think the sharp players in the community will be on Tashonis. He's just way too cheap at that price. At 6,300, and he's going to take over 15 shots. So I think there's like Long Beach State, even though they're 20-point dogs, they're projected to score over 70 points, and they run a really, really short rotation, and they play super fast. I think he's very live. I think both the Traores are really live. I really like Abakar more at 7,500 just because he can fill up the stat sheet in every single category, including blocks and steals. So I think there's a lot of good plays on the Long Beach side, but Tashonis is my favorite just because he's the cheapest out of the three. And then to answer your question about Caleb Love, dude, this is the perfect environment for a huge Caleb Love game. That was the first thing that stood out to me when I was looking at the slate. But the question that I keep asking myself is, do I trust him enough to put him in my main slate, or am I just going to throw him throughout all my GPPs and go more safer in my main slate? Because we just saw him fall apart in the Pac-12 tournament. I really don't know what's going on with Arizona. Their last two games, they've been played at 64 possessions and 67 possessions, which is weird for this Arizona team. They've been really feeding Omar Ballo down low a ton. I might even, and I think he has a really, really good matchup. So, if Tommy Lloyd decides, hey, we're just going to feed Ballo all game at 8,500, he's also in play, and maybe we don't see a ton of usage from Caleb Love, just like we haven't in the last two games. So I do agree with you that this, and I'm if I had a gun to my head, I would say yes, this is going to be a big Caleb Love game, and he's way too cheap at 7,600. But I do question the risk that comes with it for a main team build.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to just lock button play him because when you get 100%, near 100% owned from your exposure Caleb Love game in which he explodes, it just feels so good because it's easy for us to root for Caleb Love. Honestly, I'm a pretty big fan. He takes way too much garbage.
I agree.
Completely agree. You're right. In Survivor, like, maybe I need to pull back a little bit because I would hate to brick out on the first day just because I'm all in on Caleb Love, and then he has one of those games where he just shoots 2 for 11 and they just end up, like you said, going to Ballo or perhaps like we see Bradley and Lewis just do all the heavy lifting there. So definitely something I'm gonna have to think about over the next few hours. But either way, I'll have exposure for sure. But I was leaning towards playing him in my main, but I definitely need to think about it more. You're right.
There's just something to think about. Well, I'm
Yeah.
not trying to talk you off Caleb Love because he's a great play. It's just, what risk do you want to go in your main lineup is the question, right?
You're exactly. Cause I'm honestly like the way I'm going to play this. I'm like probably, I do multiple lineups, but I usually like to jam in like that one main into all the, the contests, and thinking if I want to have like an ultra safe 50-50 lineup in the Survivor and then a different main. So I don't know, there's a lot going on. It's not like I'm going to speak tonight, so I'll have plenty of time to figure it out. All right, moving on to the next game, we have Wagner, the winners of yesterday's first 4 game against Howard, and that first half by Howard was rough. I was rooting for them, but Wagner, good on them. They played extremely well. Going up against North Carolina, total of 133.5. And North Carolina, we have another big spread here. DK, just a few minutes ago when I checked, 25-point favorites up against Wagner here. Now, this is a little bit different because, again, like last year in the tournament, Howard, I can't remember what seed they were. It was low, but they, there were several players shy of them and Dockery that ended up semi-optimal because of how well they played. So it doesn't mean we can't look at some of these guys on those 15, 16 seed lines, but this North Carolina team, man, they look determined. They look like a well-oiled machine, and I am extremely worried about using a regular P5 team against them lately, let alone somebody like Wagner. So where's your head at for this game?
So, we've been doing this for a long time, Walt, and especially in the non-con, we see it a lot where you get a Power 5 team, a really good team, going against a low major team that probably doesn't have the size to compete with the high major squad. And this is a matchup that reminds me of that a lot. And during those games, I really, really love to target the centers, just because there's just nobody who can match up with them. So offensive rebounds are galore, putbacks, block shots. So I think this matchup sets up really, really well for Armando Bacot. And again, I kind of have the same feeling for Bacot that I do for Caleb Love, because there were times throughout the season where UNC just didn't feed him. He got benched. He picked up 2 quick fouls. And also with, there's a lot of rebounds that Ingram takes from him, since he's been brought over to the team. So, it's a little scary, but, this Wagner team, we saw them play 2 nights ago in the playing game. And Bryce Harris, you can see him at 6'4", kind of body the Wagner bigs up a little bit. There's no way they can handle Bacot down low. So at 8,200, I think he's a very, very live and safe. I can't say safe, but I think he's a really good play with high upside against this really small Wagner team. I think that's really the only. If you want to go Ingram at 7,500 and kind of fade Bacot, then that's the way to go. But I'm a big Bacot fan. I think he's way more talented than he's shown all season. I think he shows up in the tournament, which he's done in the past. So he's my favorite play in this game. If you look at the Wagner side, they do run a really tight rotation. I think they only have 7 scholarship guys. They came out priced a little higher than I wanted them to, but there is one person, their point guard, Javier Esqueda, at 4,300. He doesn't really shoot that much, but he can fill up the stats and rebounds and assists and steals. If he's playing 40 minutes at 4,300, I don't hate going there for value. So that's the one guy on the Wagner side I'm looking at. But other than that, it's just Bacot on the UNC side to have a big game down low. And that's really it.
Yeah, Esqueda, he's been, so this will be the 3rd slate that Wagner's been on, and obviously he was min priced the first time, 3.9 the second, and now 4.3. So they've been raising his price a little bit, but this is one of those plays where I think 4.3. It's enough to do some damage to your lineup if he totally bricks out, but I don't think he will. He's just, like you said, he's playing the entire game, and he's fairly active. He doesn't shoot all that much, but he does take a couple threes every game, and it's good to hit 1 or 2. And he's very, very active as the facilitator of this offense, as a true point guard would. He had 8 assists against Howard. He looked like just was all over the floor too, flying around. So I do think he'll probably end up with quite a bit of ownership there, because people are at this point, the more familiar they are with Wagner now that he's been on the slate for 3 different times in the last week and a half. So I would expect him to see a sizable amount of ownership. That is one of those plays where, everybody gets on him, and then, he gets like a 5 or something, but I think we've seen enough of him to go and feel pretty good here. But I am worried about this North Carolina team, just like popping them in the mouth. Wagner's at this point, I do feel like Wagner, like they won the play-in game. They're happy. They're on borrowed time, right? Like they're going to try hard for sure, but it's like they kind of had their Super Bowl, right? So I do worry about them being able to score enough, and that might lead to less Esquera assists, less shots. We'll see what happens there, but he's definitely the one in play. And I like the Baycott call. I'm probably going to do Ingram rebounding props. You're the prop master, but Ingram rebounding props this year for us have been really, really kind. They also have they started doing at the DK Sportsbook rebounds plus assist props, what they weren't offering before in my area. So I've been hitting this. He's like 11.5, 10.5, and he usually hits those pretty well. So I'll be looking at those props there for Harrison Ingram. All right, moving on to the next game here, Illinois, and I see the Illinois super fan in there trying to get on your side there, get your attention. It looks like Illinois versus Morehead State is a total of 147. The Illini are 11-point favorites. A fairly fun game. Coming into it, man, scary Terry Shannon, who is your guy, regardless of how you feel about the actual Illini team. Scary has been a absolute monster, and coming into the tournament, he is just red hot. His usage and shot rates both eclipsing 27% at this time, shooting about 36% from long range. He is just that dude that you need a basket. He's going to get it. 34 real points against Wisconsin, 40 against Nebraska, 28 against Ohio State. Just a really wicked Big Ten tournament run there. And there's a reason I like the Badgers so much in this tournament, by the way, but I'll talk about that way later. But the way that he was just able to perform against them, and they withstood it till the last couple of minutes. What he's been doing with his drives is he's just initiating a lot of contact, so he's racking up those free throws. And as Illinois gets into more competitive games throughout this tournament, he's going to be a priority play for me, and I'm sure you'll have high amounts of him as well, because when those games are close to the end and it turns into the free throw and foul shooting fest, that is when Terry Shannon's going to go from 19 real points to 32 in the blink of an eye. You see, he took 17 of them against Wisconsin near the end, 16 against Nebraska, and 11 against Ohio State. So you guys know at this point, Terry is an absolute machine. I don't care what price he is, who he's playing. He's just tailor-made for this tournament. A little expensive at 9.3, considering how tight pricing is on this slate for the most part. But at this point, if he's not 10K, I have to consider using him in a lot of different lineups. I don't have a strongest take on the other options, like Marcus Domask at 8K. Like he's been good. Coleman Hawkins has kind of turned into a less consistent option, more what we saw from him last year. He's still been good too, but he's at 7.4. I just have a lot of trust issues with those two. Obviously, this is a matchup in which they should do well. This offense of Illinois is extremely potent, and expect all of these guys to put up some fairly decent to borderline 5x scores potentially. But the opportunity cost for Hawkins and Domask are just a little uncomfortable for me. I want to find that 1,300 to get the Shannon, or pay down to perhaps Ty Rogers, who is our friend Scott to USU's super fan. He's won him a seat or two, I think. Played just the 18 minutes against Wisconsin because of foul trouble. That is something that pops up. Don't think we have to worry about that here in this spot. I do like him at the elevated price of 5.9, a little bit higher, but still well within range of making value there in this particular matchup. And then I guess we have to ask, it's not cheap at all, but Dane Danger, who, God, if we could just predict when he's going to play 20 minutes and when he's not, then it would be such an easy game, because his overall usage, his rates, his fantasy point per minute number are all insanely good. But I don't know when it's going to be a 6-minute game, and I'm not sure when it's going to be a 22-minute game. And I dipped my toe in the water there against Nebraska, had a little bit of exposure, obviously didn't work out, played 22 minutes against Wisconsin. They needed him there in the front court. Maybe necessarily won't need him here in this spot, but this would be a good game for them to get him additional playing time, especially in the second half. So I like Danger as a GVP look. Would have liked him a hell of a lot more if he was like 4K, though, because 5.4 is just a very dangerous territory. Clearly not a main team look by any means. And then you have Luke Good at 4K, guard forward eligibility up a little bit. He was 3.3 last slate. Now he's 4K, which makes it a bit tougher. 3-point shooter, mainly what he offers and brings to the table. So probably more of a secondary type of play, but I certainly don't mind him if you need to use that some value. The NAIA superstar that is Riley Minix, I got to tell you, Mike, coming into the season, like his first game, and Morehead was on the slate very early. I think it was the Bama game, and he had a really big performance at a cheap price, and was like, okay, well, the kid's good, but he's not going to be doing this. But then he continued to do it all season, all game long, and now we're in the tournament, and we're talking about an 8.4K Riley Minix, and the first run of the projection sheet that I work on, he projects over 4.5x. So his rates are fantastic. I don't know that I could get there in my main and comfortably feel like, yeah, I can use Minix, but man, he just continues to produce. Doesn't matter what the opponent is, and he's just been a very good player. It's amazing to see. Just like JUCO guys are winning Player of the Year awards in D1. Just doesn't matter. There's great players at all levels of basketball, and that's been very prevalent this season with the various different looks from D2, NAIA, and JUCO. Who are some of the other options on Morehead you might be looking at, and how much are you on Terry Shannon for this one?
I would love to be on Terry Shannon if you can fit him in, but that's just a really, really high price point and a large slate. The pricing's pretty tight. But like you said, the dude is just an absolute freak show, especially over the last month. It's been awesome to watch. Even though I do root against the Illini all the time, just because being a Rutgers fan, but I can appreciate the run that guy's been on. It's just been awesome to watch. So if you can fit him in, he's definitely in play. The other guys are good plays, but I wouldn't say great plays. And for me, it's hard for me to put my finger on this matchup. I do know a lot of people that think that Morehead has a live shot of winning this game. To me, I don't really see it. I know Morehead's going to really try to slow it down. They played a slow tempo on offense. I know that they have great transition defense, so they're going to try to limit the Illini in transition, which, we know how scary Terry can be when he gets the ball off a rebound. He can go. So even though they do have great transition defense, can they really stop him once he gets a rebound? I don't know. I don't think anybody can. I don't really have a good read on this game, so it's hard for me to get behind any of these plays. Minix, I would be more excited about him if he was in the 7K instead of the 8K range. I think there's better options in that higher price point that have better matchups, I would say. And I do like your Ty Rodgers call. I do think this is a matchup where, as long as he stays out of foul trouble, the guy can fill up the stat sheet at 5,900. His ceiling is really high, especially in GPP. I would definitely mix him in there. Coleman Hawkins, I think, also is an option. I know he's been poor from a fantasy perspective over the last week or two, but we've seen him have a run in the middle of the season where he was putting up 40 pretty much consistently. And this is a matchup where I don't think they have somebody who can guard him on the perimeter at 6'10". So Hawkins is in play as well. And, you have Jordan Lathan there at 5,800. There was a game, I think it was against Indiana, when Morehead played them in the non-conference, where Minix got shut down, but Lathan really came alive. I think he had maybe 40 fantasy points, 30 real points. So 5,800, if you do think that the Illini defense is going to key on Minix, Lathan can be the guy at 5,800. It's pretty cheap for him. But, again, this is probably going to be more on the slower pace side. The total is only 146.5, and we've seen the Illini score like 90 points the last week on average. I think there's good plays here, but not great plays. I wouldn't be, marking any of these in my main lineup. There's just pieces that are going to be part of my pool.
Yeah, maybe this is one, like you said, that, with the reputation of Illinois as a high-scoring team, maybe this is one to back off on. So I like that call. Looking at the Morehead State guys outside of Minix, like you had mentioned on Lathon at 5'8", Thelwell at 5'9", he's had some pretty big games. Like, those are all fairly cheap prices for those guys, considering how high their rates are. Like, Jordan Lathon has a 29% shot rate, 25% usage rate. Like, these guys can all put up points in a hurry. And have performed pretty well against upper tier competition. So I am interested in them to a degree, but I think it's not a stack situation by any means. And I really do want to keep things open. It's not like conference week where we have all this news popping up. We do have some injuries and some things, but for the most part, we're going to know whoever's going to play is going to play. So it's not as if we're going to have like huge swap opportunities, other than if you're playing in the Mania and you need to try to outwork your opponent. So you can play this PMR early, but it's still one of those things in a large 16-game slate. I want to keep some available, so in case something pops up that I can make some moves if I need to. So this is one game that I was at first feeling pretty interested in. The sheet has a lot of guys projecting over value, but I think it is one that I'm going to try to temper expectations on, but I want some Terry Shannon for sure somewhere.
Yeah,
All right,
I will say this, Walt, that I just pulled it up. So Morehead State played 4 Power 5 or Power 6 conference teams in the non-con, and they got blown out by 30 plus in 2 of them against Purdue and Bama, and they lost by 23 to Penn State. And their 4th one, they lost by 1 to Indiana, but that's Indiana. So, you know, when this team did step up against high competition this year, they really didn't play that well. So just something to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, definitely. I remember that I don't remember the other ones but I remember the Alabama game vividly because of what Minix did at such a low price. But yeah, that's a
3K to start.
Yeah, I remember they got blown out, but I was like, Jesus, this guy is amazing. But yeah, that's a great call out. So
he ain't 3K no more.
KenPom has it like 12-point spread, it looks like. So I don't know. Maybe it is good to take just the Illinois spread and just bet this one instead. All right, next game on the slate here, you have Oregon versus South Carolina. Oregon is a 1-point favorite on DK currently, a total of just over 133. Ducks, of course, winning the Pac-12 tournament. I, of course, despise the Ducks with all of my being, but I have to admit their win in the tournament there was strong. And Fali Dante just, really, people know how good he is. He hadn't had these like massive performances on the big stage, Pac-12 network. Very few people are watching that except me and maybe like 3 other people. And he got a chance in front of, a lot more people there in the Pac-12 title game to throw down just a monster 25-9 performance. And a lot of people are talking about him this week that, you didn't hear that chatter about him before for anyone that wasn't a Ducks fan or playing DFS. He's been exceptional over the last month of the season. I love South Carolina though. So for me, I'm picking North South Carolina. I like them. I'm betting them. I'm doing all that stuff. But I am seeing a lot of people who are just, assuming that Dante's going to come in here and throw down a 2020 game against South Carolina. And I'm not so sure that's just a foregone conclusion. Lamont Paris has done an exceptional job with this South Carolina team. They had massive talent last year. G.G. Jackson, it just didn't work out. They got him out of there. He's playing pretty well in the NBA. He said something that I thought was really mature of him. Maybe the team wasn't the problem. Maybe he was the problem. And for him to say that and watch, South Carolina, they're in the tournament this year. Like, they play a lot better. They have, the right guard mix with Michi Johnson and Talon Cooper. And I feel like not enough people are giving them credit for winning a game or 2 here in the tournament and possibly meeting the Vols again for a rubber match because guard play is so strong for them. And I don't think it gets enough recognition. And then, of course, my guy, CMB, Colin Murray Boyles, who comes into this one pretty expensive, which I'm kind of upset about because I really want to use him, but he's just playing way too well. So well, in fact, that I'm starting to get worried that he might declare for the NBA draft after this. But, we got him cheap 2 months ago, really just kind of figured him out a little bit early about how he was trending in the right direction. BJ Mack was trending in the wrong direction. Everybody started using him. He started just crushing everybody. And now here we are with a matchup on point here with N'Faly Dante. Foul trouble for sure happening to one of them. Dante, the grizzled vet. CMB not. He's defrost, but I don't think he'll back down. But I do defer to the South Carolina guard play here for them to win this game. As far as DFS purposes go, I think Cooper at 6'3" and Michi Johnson at 6'5" are both very usable options, especially if you're going to go with the survivor lineup and you need somebody who's going to have the ball in their hands a lot like Cooper or Michi who's going to shoot a lot. That I think is the way to go. Oregon's guards to me, Jermaine Cuisinart, I've had this on and off with him a lot. Like he would chalk bust all the time at South Carolina. It was hilarious. Fading him was so easy. He's settled into a nice role here with Oregon, gets obviously the revenge game or whatever. But looking outside of him, like Jackson Shellstat and Jadrian Tracy, like to me, those guards aren't better than what South Carolina has. I know that Tracy's cheap and he's going to project pretty decently. He has a lot, but he just doesn't move the needle for me. Even sub 5K, I'm just not that interested in him. Shellstat has shown some upside, but again, I don't know. This South Carolina team, they're going to play slow. They're going to grind it out. They're going to make you uncomfortable. And I just don't know that this Oregon team is going to be quite ready for that. It's going to be different than what they typically saw against Pac-12 opponents. Dante will probably do his thing, but I have to question, are they even going to be able to get him clean looks and get the ball in a post entry with this harassing South Carolina defense? So how do you see this one going? Who are some of the options that you like?
So this is one of the more interesting first round matchups, I think, that we'll see tomorrow. I get why a lot of people are in Oregon. I also get why you like South Carolina. We can just say it right now. Lamont Paris should win Coach of the Year with the job he's done with this team, hands
Absolutely.
down. It's just been incredible with the level of talent that he has, the expectations they had coming into the season. It's just been an unreal season for them. But Walt, South Carolina still, looking at the metrics, are 50th in KenPom. That's probably one of the lower 6 seeds we've seen in a long time. I know that they have some really quality wins, but there's a reason why their metrics are so poor. I do love their backcourt, veteran backcourt, disciplined backcourt. But this Oregon team under Dana Altman over the last week has really shined and has been mainly just playing these weird amoeba type zones and really stymieing whoever they've been playing. Like Arizona scored 59 points against them. So I guess the question we have to ask is, who do we think can have better success on offense? Is it these Oregon guards who probably aren't as good as the South Carolina perimeter, but can they have success against the South Carolina drop coverage? And can they find creative ways to get the ball to the best player, Dante? Versus, can these South Carolina guards or can Lamont Paris scheme against this weird morphing 3-2, 2-3 zone that Dana Altman has put together that a lot of people are confused about, right? I honestly think that BJ Mack is going to be the key for South Carolina. I think they're going to have to find him in the middle of the zone to make some plays, and he could be a zone buster. He can step out and shoot. He can get in the high post and go to work against Dante. I think he's actually the key and not really the South Carolina backcourt. So I have interest in him at 5,900. It just worries me that he only plays like 25 minutes instead of in the 30s. Yeah. And I do also think that Dante is a live play at 8,600, maybe even a pivot off of Baycott if I get too worried about Baycott. The dude's been shooting like 90% from the floor the last 2 weeks, and he's been getting the ball thrown at him a ton. He's playing close to 35 minutes. Rebounds, he blocks shots, he steals. The game's, like you said, the game's going to be played in the half court, so he's not going to lose possessions because of transition. So I think he's a live play there at 8,600. And the only other person I have in my player pool besides Mac and Dante is Jadrian Tracy at 4,600, just because been playing like 36, 37 minutes. At 4,600, he is a live value play there as well. But that's my analysis of the game. I personally am going to be on the Oregon side. I just think that the zone defense gives South Carolina more trouble than the drop coverage does for Oregon.
Yeah, that's why I love when you come on the show, man, because you got that synergy. I was asking you about a synergy sub a little while ago, because that's something I'm going to be investing in for next season. Because
you have to. It's great. It's great.
Yeah, like having you on, obviously having you on here is beneficial, but when you drop that kind of stuff and those little tidbits, like that's just huge for everybody that's watching the show right now. Because BJ Mack, he played well in the last few games in the SEC tournament, but like you said, losing minutes, that's been kind of coinciding with CMB. But if he's going to be used in that kind of capacity or as a high poster in the middle of the zone, like we used to just absolutely rock the Syracuse zone with the high post play that nobody could figure out except we were always on it. So that definitely perks me up and makes me have some interest in BJ Mack, even though I wrote him off months ago and would never roster him. But it might be time to go back to him. So that's a great call out. I still don't like Oregon, but your analysis there is good. What about Kwame Evans at 4'9"? Might he be able to do some things in the half court, or you think he's a little more set when they're playing faster?
Yeah, hasn't his minutes been going down a little bit, or is he still playing high minutes?
Yeah, well, he in the first 2 games in the Pac-12 tourney, he was like under 20, and then they used him more in the Colorado game just because of their size, I think.
Yeah, I love his talent. He's a great player. He's going to be really good. Am I going to play him at 4,900 where I could play somebody like Luke Apple or somebody like that at 5K, or the guy from St. Peter's? I don't know, but he is live. It's not the worst matchup for him. I don't hate it, Walt.
All right, fair enough. Yeah, just one of those plays, just looking for an angle on some, large field GBP plays that are gonna be like 2% owned. He's shown some upside before. Certainly not a safe play, but like you said, he's one of those ones. Like I try to get on guys a little bit early. Like I've been definitely keeping an eye on him. If he doesn't transfer, that is, I don't think he will, but you never know these days. All right, moving on to the next game here, we have a very interesting matchup: Dayton versus Nevada. total of 136.5. Nevada, a 1-point favorite here. Dayton, a lot of people thought maybe they should have been, a little bit of a lower seed. Nevada maybe higher. I don't know. One of those typical, to me, looks like a coin flip match. Dayton, to me, has the best player in the game in Durant Holmes. Nevada has very interesting looks. They've got some, a team of role players and Keenan Blackshear. Obviously, they've got some, early in the season when they beat my Huskies, a lot of people were asking me, like, how could you lose to Alfred? Is this Nevada team that good? Turns out they were, in fact, that good, and they're a tournament team. So starting us off with this one, what are some of the options that you're looking at, and who do you think is going to win? Because this is one I'm having a hard time with.
Yeah, and like you said, this is a coin flip. This is actually a really cool matchup that the committee put together, because it's just really hard to pick a side in this one. Like you said, Holmes is the best player, is going to be the best player on the court. And I think what this game really comes down to is, Nevada has they love to draw fouls and get to the foul line. They have one of the highest drawing fouls rate in the entire country. So it's really going to be really, really important that Holmes stays out of foul trouble in this game. You're going to have Blackshear attacking him probably for the first 5 minutes of the game, trying to get him in foul trouble. So number one, Holmes needs to stay out of foul trouble. Number two, Dayton is one of the highest three-point shooting teams in the entire country. So they need to be hot from three. And then also, who's going to win the rebounding battle and who's going to win the turnover battle? Doing more analysis, it does seem like Nevada would probably own the rebounding advantage and the turnover advantage, so have a little more extra possessions. And I think that's going to be key in a game that's going to be really close. There's some risk on the home side with the fouls. And just in March, when there's a close game, if you have to pick a better backcourt, so you have Blackshear and Lucas versus a better front court and Holmes, you're always going to side with the backcourt. So I have a lean towards Nevada. I think they squeak out a really close one. It could be an ugly game, but Dayton can easily win if they get hot from three, because they have much more, besides Lucas, they have much more efficient three-point shooters. From a fantasy perspective, with there's a total of 136.5 and a 16-game slate, I don't hate if you want to get Holmes in there, but he's just very high priced with not that much value. The only one I really would look at in this game, because I think his usage is going to be really, really high, is Blackshear in a close game at 7K. Again, a 16-game slate. You want to play more safe because you wanted to be survivor. There's a lot of good head-to-heads. There's a lot of good 50-50s. He's a guy that has a really high floor. He fills the stat sheet in all categories. I don't think there's anybody on Dayton who can really guard him with that size. And he's going to be aggressive. So I like Blackshear at 7K, but that's probably it, Walt, from this game.
Yeah, definitely. He's got fantastic rates, like you said. He's really just blossomed. It seems like it was forever ago, COVID, when he was at FAU, and he's just really blossomed into a star here. The Dayton guards have been almost just like nearly impossible to figure out on a game-to-game basis for DFS, and a lot of times they've been super cheap. Bennett's been kind of banged up, but they're all over 6K, except for Bennett, and Cheeks is up over 6.6. So I don't have really any interest there either. And this is one of those ones that to me could just be like that, 62-58 type of score where, maybe there's a couple of guys that get over 3.5X, but overall, I don't think it's one of those games, knock on wood, triple overtime, where you end up, you fade it and you're like, damn, I can't believe I faded that. What did I do? Like, I don't think a lot of regret happens from this one. Yes, like you said, it'd be nice to have Holmes, and his probably what he'll get is close to 40. But the opportunity cost there and what you'll have to roster to get him just feels a little too heinous. All right, so we'll move on to the next one here. Colorado State versus Texas. Total of 144. Texas 2-point favorites. We saw a master class yesterday. 2 days ago, I guess, from whenever you're watching this, by Colorado State over Virginia. I don't have to talk about that for very long, but the way that CSU played, finally kind of getting over the hump there. Mountain West has had some troubles in the early part of the tournament, but damn, that's the way that they hit shots, that they defended, and the way that Nick Clifford played. We've seen Nick Clifford play really well throughout this season, but that was just one of the best performances, not his highest score, but best overall performance I've seen from him since he's been in the collegiate level. Colorado State, really like what he offers here. Prices are reasonable on these guys going up against Texas. I'm a pretty big Longhorns fan after last year, my man Dylan Dessou, but not as big on Terry and his coaching job. And this Texas team, to me, I have some question marks about them. I think this Colorado State team, as far as we usually get a play-in first 4 team that makes a little bit of a run. A lot of times it's a team that's like on the morphine drip, doesn't belong in, like a Virginia. Not the team that does, but I think Colorado State could actually end up winning a couple of these games. I did pick Texas to win this one, but after what I saw the other night, I'm feeling pretty good about this Colorado State team, especially when you consider that Isaiah Stevens didn't have a very good game. One of his worst games in quite some time, honestly. Only took 5 shots, but he just, he didn't need to. So I think in this game, going up against Texas in a backcourt with Max Abmas, who's a big-time shot maker, this is where Isaiah Stevens is going to have to step up and do those Isaiah Stevens things. Program all-time leader in points, steals, everything. Only 7.5K. That to me seems like an extremely advantageous price for where he should be well over 8K. Neek Clifford over him at 7.6. Like, that's pretty crazy. Neek's been good and he's worth it, but Stevens at that 7.5 price, like, I'm just easily zoning in on that and looking to him and feeling quite good about it. You do have value pieces for Colorado State that play minutes. Palmer, Lake, Strong. None of them do very much with their minutes, so they're not that exciting. This could be a game in which Patrick Cartier gets hot. We know he shoots a ton, doesn't offer a whole lot else. He is 5'2". That's okay. But Stevens is just that one that sticks out. Always love Max Abmas in March. He's a legend. I mean, it's wild to even think about the Oral Roberts run, because like a lot of those guys are in the NBA for multiple years now, and here we got Max still doing his thing. So he's in play, high usage. We know that. Texas is kind of like an easy team to figure out. They have a short rotation, but the consistency issues have been there all year long. Dylan Dessou has, he's dealt with health issues. Obviously, he was out long term. Fouls end up just derailing him so hard. It's an exceptional price at 7K. But I feel like it's really hard to trust him in the way that Colorado State's playing right now. I don't think I'm using him as a main team look. I had to go back and look at that slate he delivered last year. It was in the second round. So, of course, I have an affinity for him and want to use him, but I'm having a hard time clicking his name in as a main team play. As far as anybody else on this team, Dylan Mitchell is cheap at 6'2", but he has been really, really lackluster lately. He did have 20-plus fantasy points in each of the last 2 games to end the season. Still getting minutes. We saw Caden Shedrick coming in, Brock Cunningham, who's dealing with injuries. So there's been some minutes that have been split amongst those 3, which has hurt Dylan Mitchell's overall upside. But I do think we see him get back to playing 30-plus minutes in this spot. Don't hate the idea of that as a 6'2" balance build type of play. But otherwise, I think Abmas and Stevens as a duo to play in your lineup or a GPP could be very, very tasty. I think, additional periods could happen here, maybe in overtime, but at the very least, at the end of the game, those 2 guys trading off shots could be very, very fun. What do you think?
Yeah, so I am a big fan of this Colorado State team. Isaiah Stevens is a complete baller. Nico Medved probably has the deepest playbook of any coach in the entire country. Their offense is just beautiful to watch, and we saw them to an extent have success against Virginia. I think it was more just Virginia couldn't score the rock. But yeah, Isaiah Stevens is way too cheap here at 7,500. The only thing that makes me pump the brakes a little bit is we did just see Reese Beekman lock him up a little bit, who is obviously a elite defender. Texas also has an elite defender in Tyrese Hunter that they're probably going to have on Isaiah Stevens the whole game. So it's not like this is the greatest matchup for Isaiah Stevens. I think it's a good game environment for him, but if Hunter's going to be following him around, I might hesitate a little bit. And looking at the other side, I'm surprised you didn't pull out your Dylan Dessou jersey, Walt, because
it's here.
There it is. Because we know how this guy performs in March.
True.
The run he had last year. And looking at Colorado State's roster, there's not one person on that team that can guard that guy. I really think that Texas needs to go to him early and often. His rates are absolutely ridiculous. I was just looking at them before. They're way higher than I even thought they were. I think he has a 30% shot rate, and his block rate's like 5%. If he plays 30, 35 minutes,
that's the key.
In this matchup, he stays out of foul trouble. There's not one person on that Rams team that can guard him. I think he's a difference in this game. I like him a lot at 7K, to be honest. I know it's a big risk, but the upside is just too great to pass up, in my opinion. And I'd rather play him than Stevens if you're going to play somebody in this matchup. I like your Mitchell call. I think he's too cheap as well, but he's definitely more of a GPP type of play. And Clifford's also live. If he's going to put up triple-double type numbers like he did against Virginia, which is a really stout defense, then he's definitely live at 7,600. And then the last guy I have in my player pool is Ithiel Horton, just because I know it's either he plays 5 minutes or 30 minutes. He played closer to 30 minutes last game, so at 4,400, he does get shots up. He does mix in some rebounds. You're looking for some value in a slate that's deprived of value. He's definitely an option as well. But for me, it's Disu over Stevens in this matchup.
All right. Yeah, no, I had to throw up the Posh shirt jersey. It's been up for a while, but having you on, I had to show my gratitude for the gift. Yeah, man, I love D. So you're right. No, they're not gonna. It's one of those situations like they're not gonna stop him. It's gonna stop himself. Like he's just been.
It's a risk.
The way he's been playing, yeah. And I'm trying to do this, safety thing. But I'm playing him last year at like sub 15%. Obviously worked out. So, but it's definitely a great call. And if they get him 32, 35 minutes, like you said, and they get him the ball and they're running their offense the way we know they can, yeah, there's no reason to think he couldn't drop a 50 here. So it would definitely feel bad to have no exposure. We'll have some, but I don't know. The Stevens play just seems cheap, but maybe that's just a case of like it's too cheap, but the matchup sucks, like you said. So we'll see how that goes. But
Stevens is a great play. I'm not telling you he's not a good play.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's a game I'm looking forward to. That's one I'm definitely going to watch from start to finish, though. I'm going to have multiple screens going, but this is one of the games on day one that I'm looking forward to. All right, moving on to the next game here. We have Oakland versus Kentucky, total of 162. Kentucky, 13.5-point favorites. We know their offense is incredible. The talk of everybody saying, well, filling up brackets, they don't defend. Oakland's got some really intriguing pieces. We had the Horizon League semis and the finals in DFS slates recently. If you're not familiar with Trey Townsend by now, you should be. The last 2 seasons. This is a fun matchup. During the brackets, I really wanted to pick Oakland over them. I couldn't bring myself to do it, but I'm really going to be rooting for them to do so. And I think Townsend is going to be a major problem for them. Problem, though, when you look at it, is all of this Kentucky size. However, are they going to be able to use it properly? So why don't you break this one down for us and tell us who you like?
Yeah, so the total here is 162, so it's the second highest on the slate. So you want to try to get some exposure to this game. We know Oakland plays mostly that soft, very conservative 2-3 zone. That's very easy to pick apart. And we know that Kentucky all year has, like you said, struggled defensively, especially on the perimeter against guards. I can never figure out who the heck on Kentucky is going to go off. That rotation is so deep. And sometimes Calipari's rotations don't make any sense. So I try to stay away from that situation as much as I can. But all those guys are live. I don't know if they're a main team live, but they all have high upside. So they're all in play. One guy I was really looking at was Trey Mitchell. Just wondering if his minutes are going to get increased because it's tournament time. I know he's coming off an injury. I know he's been playing under 20 minutes, but he is their best big man, and his minutes are going to get ramped up at some point. So is this the matchup? He's only 5,400. We know when he's getting 30-plus minutes, has a floor of about 25. So I would like to get some sort of confirmation from Cal, but probably not going to happen. But that's someone I'm interested in to throw into at least some GBPs at 5,400. Agana Nyenzo as well. We know his upside with his blocks. At 4,700. It's just his minutes that are very inconsistent. So overall on the Kentucky side, it's just really hard to pick somebody, Walt, even though you want to really badly in this really high tempo game. On the Oakland side, I'm curious to see how confident you are in Trey Townsend. I watched their championship game where he put up 60 fantasy points. It was like 30 points, 15 rebounds, whatever it was. The guy's a baller. He's a little undersized. I do think that they don't look for him enough in the Oakland offense. But the guy can score literally from anywhere on the floor. And I don't know if there's anybody in Kentucky who can guard him, but I do think that like Big Z and Onyenso could give him a little bit of trouble inside if he's just working in the post just because he's a little undersized. But 7,600 is a good price. He has his massive upside. So I'm definitely super interested in him. I'm just still trying to figure out if I want to put him on my main team or not. But Oakland also has some other pieces that are interesting as well in a high tempo game, especially against a weak perimeter defense. So Blake Lampkin at 5,800 is somebody who can score a lot and also mix in some rebounds, mix in some assists. The game's high tempo. He can get there fantasy wise. And also DQ Cole. If Rocket Watts isn't playing still, DQ Cole is getting all of those guard minutes from Rocket Watts. It's only 5,300. We saw him pop off in the semis. I think he had a big game of their conference tournament. So he has high potential as well. And then I mentioned before, but Rocket Watts, what's the deal with him? He's only 3,800. I know he's been injured, but if we can get some sort of confirmation from Campy that he's good to go and he's getting, 25 minutes, starter minutes, maybe 30 minutes, we know he has talent. We know he used to play for the Spartans. He used to start for the Spartans. He's a talented guard against a weaker defensive perimeter. So 3,800. I doubt we're going to get any confirmation of what kind of minutes he's going to play, but someone to at least look at 3,800. But I think that's all I got in this game. It's just those Kentucky slates are just really difficult for me.
Yeah, with Rocket Watts, like he's only started one game since December 20th, and he played like 10 minutes in that game. So I know there's some injury stuff, and then there was talks of like some DMP CD, like, hey, he's not really hurt, but he's hurt kind of thing. I don't know. It's tough. Like if you got the large field extra lineup that you don't mind throwing a spot there, like and he actually plays 20 minutes or something, like that could be an absolute home run because he clearly has talent. Like he doesn't keep getting gigs Mississippi State and here because he's not good at basketball, right? So and he has actually really solid rates when he does play. But DQ Cole is actually really interesting here against this defense. You mentioned Trey Townsend. Like my worry there with him was because he, in the horizon, like he can bully ball his way through. He's only like 6'6". He's just all this size that Kentucky has. The problem with Kentucky is that they rotate those guys out. Bradshaw will play if he's like playing really well, blocking shots, hitting shots. He's playing 11 minutes. If he's giving nothing and gets foul trouble early, like he'll just play 2 minutes. Z, he's got incredible rates. Like I can't even put like 15 more minutes next to his name in the projection sheet because they just like projects him for 6X because he had all those crazy early season games or early for him games. So it's hard to trust him because he's in and out. And then Onyenso, who I love, but his minutes have been all over. So they have the size to keep Townsend out of there. He's got the versatility to give those guys problems at the same time. But like you said, I'm worried that the guy that like DQ Cole and company aren't going to get him the ball as much. That's what really happened in the semis. It was really frustrating. He ended up with 35 and he scored a bunch later, but it's because he got to the foul line a bunch in the second half against Cleveland State. He wasn't really getting shots in the first half, and it's because Jack Golke was just like chucking from downtown like he was Steph Curry. DQ Cole had like this irrational confidence game, and then Lampman started getting, a lot better as the game went on. So I think that's going to be the case here. Those guys are going to be able to get a lot of open looks in any space at all. Like Jack Golke, he's just irrational confidence central. He's going to chuck. Like that guy, I don't know if you know what he looks like, but he looks like the poster child for Duke. Like I'm surprised he's not a walk-on at Duke. But that's what worries me about Townsend. The 7'6" just high enough to make you really think about it. I know it seems cheap at first glance, but I'm just really worried that he's not going to get enough touches, enough shots up, and his rebounding numbers are going to take a hit here too with all these athletes on the Kentucky side. So I'm probably not there on Townsend, which makes me sad.
I wish we had Milwaukee go through and play like DJ Freeman, right?
Yeah.
That's the guy you want to play against Kentucky.
Yeah, definitely. That would have been an absolute no-brainer, man. I would have loved that. So as much as I like Townsend and have used him over the last 2 seasons, it's probably not a spot. We were using Lampman a bunch in the Horizon semis and the finals because he was cheap. Now he's 5'8". Still plenty, cheap to get him in there. DQ Cole, I do think at 5'3" is probably my preferred option, even though like I didn't use him against Cleveland State because I didn't really see him having that 16 shot attempt game like he did. But I think this is one of those games where he will end up pulling from the parking lot often. And then GPP wise, Golke there, just because the 2 games in the Horizon tournament or the semis and the finals that we saw, he was just chucking 14 triples against Cleveland State, 12 attempts against Milwaukee. I think he's going to have obviously the green light here, and he's got pretty damn good range for what he actually does. And he contributes a little bit in other categories as well. So I'm sort of interested in him as a GPP look. That's how I want to attack Kentucky if I'm going to use it. This was a really weird one when it came came out because I was like, I want to pick Oakland. I love Trey Townsend, but then when I actually sat down and thought about it overnight, it's like I can't pick them to beat Kentucky, and I don't know that I can use Townsend unless he's super cheap, and he's cheap but not super cheap. As far as Kentucky goes, like Reed Shepherd, there's a lot of love for him in our chat, but he's 8.8K. That's just so expensive. I don't know. Maybe the next round we can talk about using him. I always like Antonio Reeves because he's kind of like the papa on this young team. He's the veteran. They had to get him back. Great scorer. And then the prices on those guys like Justin Edwards, DJ Wagner, Adu Tiero, those are all interesting prices. I mean, Wagner at 5.5 at the beginning of the season, if I would have said, hey, Mike, in March, you'll be able to roster DJ Wagner below 6K, you'd have been like, how stoned are you? And that's just, they didn't have the season that we expected. He has played pretty well. And for that price, I think he does pay off. But they're just such a, deep rotation. There's just so many mouths to feed. It just ends up being a case of, those guys have fallen out. Shepherd and Dillingham were the ones that are doing what we thought Edwards and Wagner would do. Edwards is a potential GPP winner here at 5.2. I think this could be a really nice game for him, but I am not brazen enough to use him in anything resembling a single entry contest. So that's how we'll approach that one. All right, now we move on to one that I am extremely excited about. I wanted for McNeese and or Grand Canyon, I wanted them to face Alabama. We may get a Grand Canyon Alabama matchup potentially in the second round, but McNeese draws Gonzaga. Total of 150. The Zags are 6.5-point favorites. This was one I didn't bat an eye about. I think we've had some, like, we're usually agree on things, but I think Gonzaga is a team that we're usually like far apart on. So I'm guessing I didn't get a chance to watch all of your show on Mean Streets, but I saw some of it. But see what your take on Gonzaga is. But I think McNeese is going to make a run to the Sweet 16. I absolutely love McNeese, love Will Wade. This is one of those popular upset picks that I hate being on. Like the other one is James Madison over Wisconsin, but believe it or not, like I'm super high on the Badgers all of a sudden and think that they're going to beat James Madison, even though everyone else thinks the other way. So I'm good being, leverage built in there. I'm going to fall in line with McNeese. Shahada Wells is 8.7. It's an extremely expensive price, but of all the pay-ups, and there are several that you can use and I feel okay about, he's the one that I absolutely love. At TCU, he didn't get a chance to showcase, but you'll remember there was a stretch on TCU where there were injuries. He got to start. He played more minutes. He absolutely went berserk. And after that first game, he became industry chalk for like 3 or 4 games in a row. Then they got healthy, and then he kind of just fell off again. Coming to McNeese State, he gets an opportunity to be the primary ball handler, facilitator, and shot maker, and he has just been absolutely ridiculous, winning the Southland Player of the Year and Newcomer of the Year. Extremely high shot rate, extremely high steal rate. I feel like he is just the perfect option to use against Gonzaga. He's going to give Hickman trouble. Nemhart, we know how good he's going to be, but Wells is not going to back down from these guys. He's going to definitely play with a very confident swagger, and I think he's going to take in just an absolute ton of shots. So, yes, that 8.7 price is expensive, but this is a classic 12 versus 5, and I am just about all in on Hada Wells. Like, talking about looking at getting a McNeese jersey. If he absolutely goes off in this spot, I'm going to be pulling the trigger on one of those because I love Wells and just the way he's played over this season and in the past prior to going to TCU. He's just a real deal when it comes to playing basketball. And as a guard in the tournament, this is one of those moments where I think we could see a legendary performance a la Max A. Smith for Oral Roberts a couple of seasons ago with McNeese State going on a Sweet 16 run. So that's how I feel about him. Very, very hyped for him. In the player leagues that I'm in, I've made a point to draft him everywhere. All in on this kid. They also have some other options, though, that can certainly be looked at. I think this McNeese State team is definitely live to make it to the next round and beyond. They have several players with P5 experience. Of course, coming off the bench, they have CJ Felder, who spent time at BC and Florida. They have Javon Garcia, who spent a little bit of time at UMass for sitting out. He's been actually really good, especially lately. He's a dead-eye three-point shooter, just about 46%. All of these different variety of options, 6K for him. Shumate, who was the defensive player of the year in the Southland, a ridiculous block rate. He gets steals. He grabs rebounds. Very solid option. Has to deal with Graham Ike and Anton Watson. That's not an envious position for him by any means, but we've seen Graham Ike. He's had trouble staying on the floor. And when he gets that foul trouble, it just opens up that inside tremendously. I do think McNeese is going to be attacking him and really challenging him quite a bit, which isn't always a great idea to do, but we've seen him lack that discipline to not get into foul trouble, which will open up the inside for somebody like Shumate. And then also, I think it's kind of sneaky to use Felder at 4-1. He's just way better than people realize. He had a couple of 30s recently, plays about 20, 25 minutes off the bench. Really thought he was going to turn into a big-time star. Like BC showed some flashes, like, damn, this kid's going to be really good. Didn't quite work out, but he's got a nice role for himself. Only 4.1K. I think he's one of those sneakier values that people weren't going to be talking about. There was a play a couple of years ago that was around 4-7 on New Mexico State. Nobody really talked about him. Nobody knew anything about him. Here I come in like the beginning of the week talking about him, and he has a really legendary game against Auburn. Of course, I'm talking about Trevelyan Queen. Not going to sit here and say that CJ Felder's going Trey Queen for us, but I think it sets up for a potential legendary performance from CJ Felder. Hot take, if you will, but I'm going to have heavy exposure to CJ Felder because I do think this is the game he shows out. Other options you could look at: Antonio Colum at 5K. Similar to Felder in that he plays about 20, 25 minutes, just more of a secondary tier option there if you want to get exposure to other guys that are not Hot Wells, or perhaps a mini stack of McNeese State. I do think they win, once again, in case I wasn't clear. Gonzaga side, you know the deal. Graham Ike, when he's on the floor not getting into foul trouble, he's very hard to defend. Just an absolute load. But there are so many times where he gets into that early foul trouble and can't stay on the floor. Things unravel. That's what happened against St. Mary's. Again, you saw him in the first couple of days before that, or a week or two before that against St. Mary's. He played 35 minutes, absolutely aced them. Could barely stay on the court, played less than 20, struggled, had 16 fantasy points. So it depends on if you think McNeese can actually get him into foul trouble or not. He's 8-3. I'm not willing to pay that price for him. I don't think a lot of people will, so I'm not that worried about him. Where I think that we see ownership for this team would be somebody like Anton Watson, who's a little bit more reasonable at 7.2K. He goes through spurts of being inconsistent, but right now he's dialed in, has to play just about every single minute of the game. He also gets into foul trouble, but I think he's a little bit more controlled than EK, and that 7.2 price certainly has me looking at him. I am worried about the guards, maybe a little bit too much. Maybe I think in my head, Hotto Wells is way too good of a defender, and that's not actually the case, but I don't have the interest enough to pay 8.2 for Nemhard. And Hickman, who's cheap at 6.4, I think he's going to actually have a difficult, at least first half, in this matchup. Maybe he wakes up in the second, but I think he might get popped in the mouth here in this matchup. With all that being said, where do you stand? Because I'm trying to think back to our other times talking about Gonzaga, and I'm pretty sure this is the team that we're always on the opposite sides of. So is that the case here tonight?
It is, and I think everyone knows I'm the biggest fan of the Gonzaga program. But I love your confidence, Walt. I absolutely love it. My breakdown of this game is I do think McNeese is live if they can get EK in foul trouble, which is definitely a possibility with his high foul rate. And Zaga likes to switch on defense, and I'm sure Wells is going to try to, use the picks to get to a good matchup with EK and try to attack him. The thing with McNeese State is, though, that they are terrible in transition defense. And we know how lethal the Zags can be with Nemhard in transition. And they can't defend the post. So if EK is not in foul trouble,
yes,
he can really eat in this matchup. Where I think your Wells call is great. I think he's going to take 20 shots. He can rack up steals. He has a really high assist rate. The ball's going to be in his hands the entire game. But what does worry me in this matchup is that with the Zag switching on defense, he could get matched up with Watson a lot, and Watson can really blow up a lot of their action. And he has such a size advantage, can move laterally, can really, blow up what Wells is trying to do offensively. And I don't think he's seen a defender like that all year. So that's the one thing that makes me a little scared about the Wells at such a high price, but that scared is like 10%. I think 90% he's going to make value and more. It's just it's a good game environment for him, and he's going to take a lot of shots, and the ball's going to be in his hands a lot. So I like the Wells call, and then I also like my favorite play on the Zaga side is Watson, right? Just in case EK does get in foul trouble, or the game environment that's going to be, I think, very much up and down. Watson really does strive in those type of environments, just because he can do a lot of different things. I think his block and steal upside in this game is massive. So I really like him at 7,200. And I also really like CJ Felder. I have him in my player pool as well, coming off the bench. We know he has high major talent. He played for both Boston College and Florida. He's a freak athlete. We've seen him have success in a game that's going to be a lot of possessions. I like him there, even if he's getting 20 to 25 minutes. I also have written down Mike Saunders at 3,100. I know he's only getting like 10, 15 minutes, but his rates are really good. He's another high major talent, coming from, I think, Utah last year, and then Cincinnati before that. But he'll come off the bench as a little bit of perimeter depth, and he's only 3,100. So I have him in the deep GDP value play as well. But for me, it's Wells and Watson. And I do side with the Zags to pull this one out. I like Ryan Nembhard too much. I think they can score a lot in transition here. And for me, just to pick McNeese just because Ike could maybe get in foul trouble, it's just not enough for me. So I always go back to, the Zags have made 8 straight Sweet 16s. That's so ridiculous to think about. And I don't think they get enough credit, so I'm always on their side.
Yeah, no, they really don't. They really don't. And it's funny. I was actually talking to somebody earlier this week saying like that, this roster for Gonzaga, it's good, no doubt, but like it's not as appealing or as sexy as they've had in the past. But it would be, it would be comical. Or that's not the right word. It would be it would just be funny if they made it to the Final Four or even won a title with this roster of all the rosters, the great players that have come through. Like this is the one that finally pushes them over the hump. It's a damn shame they didn't get Steele Venters, when getting the injury, because I think my tune would be a lot different right now, and they'd probably be a higher seed if they had Venters too, because this roster they don't have a lot of depth, but they're certainly talented, yeah. And this is this is the other one. Like I'm going to be glued to watching. I'm very excited about the Texas Colorado State game for whatever reason. I don't know. I just like watching Disu, of course, but this is the one that I is going to be on the bigger TV here, and I'm going to be rooting heavily for McNeese. But I thought that was funny. I kind of figured you'd be on the Gonzaga side. It's we agree on a lot, like 85% of stuff, but that's always the team that we're like different. And you're usually right about
which is okay.
So, for what it's worth. Yeah, no, for sure.
I'm sure we're 50-50 into disagreements, Walt. It's good. It's good debate. It's all fun. Yeah.
But this is gonna be a great game for sure. All right, so next game on the slate here, South Dakota State versus Iowa State. Total of 135.5. The Cyclones are about 16-point favorites. Heard you mention Luke Apple there because of how cheap he was. This is obviously a very tough spot for them to go up against the Cyclones. A lot of people thought, myself included, that they weren't the worst 2 seed by any means. Get a chance to maybe take out some anger here on what is a pretty good South Dakota State program. You mentioned Apple as a guy that you're high on. You're using him here against Cyclones in your main lineup, and who else are you going to be looking at here?
I don't know if I'm using him in my main lineup, but I do think he is towards the top of my value plays. Going up against Iowa State is something probably you want to avoid from a fantasy perspective, but where we've seen all year, where Iowa State, what their bread and butter is their defensive pressure and their physicality, right? And in order to have success against this team, similar to like a team like Houston, you need to have good guard play. And South Dakota State does have a really good guard in Zeke Mayo. And you also need like a swing 4-man or a winger that can help come up and relieve that pressure as a pressure relief, right? Like we've seen Kansas have success against Houston on the short roll with KJ Adams, like a player like that. And South Dakota State has a player like that as well in Luke Apple. The guy can handle the ball. He's about 6'8". He can come up and he can help relieve some pressure when all the wings are getting denied the rock. And I think the ball is going to be in Luke Apple's hands a lot. Is this going to be a high-scoring game? No. But I do think that South Dakota State is a live dog here. I know it's 16 points. I have a bet with them at 16 points. Just because I think Mayo can handle the pressure, and I think Luke Apple is the perfect type of big man that can help come handle the ball and actually not so that South Dakota State doesn't turn the ball over and they can get at least some sort of open looks against this really, really tough Iowa State defense. So from a fantasy perspective, I think 5,100 is too cheap, even in a tough matchup. I think it's a sneak play for Luke Apple. We've seen him in the mid to high 20s fantasy points over his last few games. I also think Charlie Easley is cheap at 5,500. I know he's going to have the ball in his hands a lot as well against this Iowa State defense. The matchup is tough, so they're not main team plays, but I am interested in them. And on the Iowa State side, it's just really hard to play anybody outside Lipsy just because of how balanced that team is, and usually how low scoring their games are. Don't get me wrong, I love this Iowa State team. I actually have them going to the finals in my bracket, but I do think this is a tough 2-15 matchup for them. So Lipsy's a little too high price. I'd rather see him in like the mid 6Ks to play him, especially in a large slate like this. So I don't really have that much interest on the Iowa State side, but Apple is probably my favorite play here at 5,100 for value.
Yeah, and honestly, there's quite a few cheap options on the South Dakota State team of their primary guys, but yeah, it's just really hard to feel too good about it against them, against the Cyclones. But yeah, and he fills a forward slot, which is traditionally a little bit more difficult to do. So the 5-1 price there for a forward certainly intrigues. As far as the Cyclones go, I agree. Lipsy, anytime he's over 7K, I got to pump the brakes there. He was so good in the non-con. I didn't peg him as a non-con hero, but starting to work his way out of that. Sean Gilbert's been just fantastic. The way that he's like just enhanced his game to another level over the last month of the season. He's going to be a big problem in this tournament, but paying 7.5 for him here also feels a little bit like a gray area for me. Do have some interest for GPPs in these Iowa State forward spots, like Trey King was cheaper last year and you were always on him. Hassan Ward, who feels like maybe he'll get a little bit more minutes here, but he's at 5K, so not getting a huge discount there. And even like, Mom Cleavage, who showed out against Houston, but none of those guys being any kind of main team plays by any means. All right, that moves us on to Tennessee versus St. Peter's, total of 130. The Vols are 21.5-point favorites, and the talk here, Randall's been on the Vols early on, picking the Final Four. I always end up, the big joke around the Discord there's, I always end up picking them to the Final Four deep in the tournament. They let me down before the Sweet 16. Them faltering in the SEC tournament, that to me, at the time it happened, I was like, oh, good, I don't have to lose money on the Vols. But then the bracket comes out, and here we are. I'm again picking the Vols to go to the Final Four. Like, I just can't learn. Player leagues, I'm drafting 2 or 3 Vols every time. I just can't help myself. I love this Tennessee team. The whole like Rick Barnes can't win in March. It's like we're up there with the Tom Izzo never leaves in March, or never loses in March. Like, neither of those things are actually true. But Barnes has had some choke jobs recently, which is why everybody says it. This Vols team is very complete. One of the problems, and this was a good discussion that was happening in the Discord earlier, is that they really need to pick an identity, right? Like, are they going to let Dalton Connect just cook the entire tournament, or are they going to try to bully them, or I do, and maybe play some Mashak and just really bully their opponents? They got to figure out one or the other, because then they get those games like they did in their, the last one that they lost. They get stuck in this translation period where it's just like they want to do both, and then they end up doing neither. Obviously, this will be a tune-up game here. Say what you will, St. Peter's, they made on the run a couple of years ago. I don't foresee that happening here. Looking at the various prices for the Vols, Dalton Connect's pretty much where he should be at 8-9. Always love him. I'm certainly going to be wanting to save my exposure for him in Maine when we get to a more, what I should be on paper, a competitive matchup. So I'm a little bit leery there. I think he'll have one of those like huge first halves where it's like, damn, why didn't I roster him? But then the second half, maybe he kind of, levels out a little bit. I do really like Zakai Zeigler, even though he's 8-1. This is a matchup where I think he just fills up the stat line, sets the tone early in the tournament for how the Vols are going to play. And I think nobody's going to utilize him. I love Zakai Zeigler. A healthy, ready to play Zakai Zeigler is very dangerous. And now we're getting to see it this year in the tournament. Couldn't be more excited. Jonas Idu at 7-8. I think he can have a really big game here against St. Peter's. But again, it's one of those, like, are they going to ride Connect? Are they going to bang down low? I don't feel like it's a great thing for them to try and do both. I want them to kind of focus on one or the other. So it makes me, kind of question playing Idu here in the spot, even though I do think he will play well. Triple J, he's always, he's been in he's been at that program for a long time. DFS players have been using him for a long time. He's a little spendy for my taste at 7K or 6-8, but when everybody ignores him, when he tends to go off, just one of those things. So I do want to have some GPP exposure somewhere. And then I do also like Santiago Vescovi. I know you're a big Vescovi fan. He's pretty cheap at 5'2". He hasn't been doing a lot lately, but we're into the tournament now. They're going to need his shot making, especially if they're going to continue to advance. And I do think we see him step up his level of play. So I have an interest here to possibly even put him in my main lineup. I think I'll stop short of that, but it is one of those situations where if he's a last man in, I wouldn't rebuild my lineup to avoid him. Let's put it that way. On St. Peter's, all of their guys are cheap. It's a matchup that is not that great on paper against the Vols. Certain players such as Latrell Reed project extremely well at 5K. Even Corey Washington, who is priced there at 6'1", a little bit higher, he projects extremely well too. A little bit leery there of using him, but this is a spot against Tennessee where they're not going to hold them to like 30 points or anything like that. And this is one of those matchups where people tend to ignore those lower seeds. And I think that's truly is a mistake because there's going to be some guys that we can utilize here that are going to make value. Again, leaning on that Hartford game from a few years back. This could be a spot where I see guys like Latrell Reed ending up putting up 30, especially in the second half where, things are maybe out of control. Rates wise, it's fantastic. 25% usage rate. Corey Washington has a 30% shot rate. Both of them draw a high number of fouls. Perhaps Tennessee comes out flat. There is always that possibility, and a 15 seed has been wrecking shop lately. So, I think that early going, there's a chance here for St. Peter's to set the tone and play pretty well. Ultimately, I think they lose, but I think Reed and Corey Washington are both certainly in play. And, of course, you have on the other side here Armani Ziegler. You can imagine who that might be. What do you like with this game?
Yeah, Walt, so you're not on an island with your love for Tennessee because I am a big Tennessee guy as well. I think if they weren't in the same region as Purdue, I would definitely have them in my Final Four as well. I think they're the third best team in the country behind Purdue and UConn. So you're not by yourself there. And I know Mike Randall has the same thoughts. I think he has them winning the whole thing. So big Tennessee guys over here at FTN. As far as this matchup goes, I do agree with you that there is some value to be had on St. Peter's side. So, they're a Jersey team. I've seen them play a couple times this year. Corey Washington's by far their best player, but I don't know if I want to pay 6,100 for a team that can really get shut down by this Tennessee team. So this, just to clear the air, the St. Peter's team is not the same St. Peter's team from a few years ago that went on the run. I don't think they have any chance of pulling up an upset against Tennessee. I think they struggle to score here. But Latrell Reed is their primary ball handler. He's not as highly used as Washington is in the offense, but he does have the ball in his hands a lot. And 5,000 is too cheap. So those two guys are live plays. I don't know if they're main team lineups, but they certainly should be in your player pool. And then on the Tennessee side, they're just way too balanced. It's and like you said, they really do need to find a true identity because it's like they go through a stretch of games where it's the Dalton Connect show, and then they go through a stretch of games where it's like, hey, we're going to get Ziegler more involved, we're going to get Triple J more involved, we're actually going to play Vescovi. Like those guys are top level talents, all of them. They have one of the best backcourts top to bottom in the entire country. So I get a little frustrated when I see, even though Dalton Connect is amazing, him take 25 shots a game. It's like, why are you forcing shots through Connect when you have such a good, talented, balanced backcourt that you can be utilizing better? So I think if they move more towards that side, it makes them that much more dangerous in this tournament. But if it's going to be the Dalton Connect show all tournament, then it does make me pump the brakes on my love for Tennessee a little bit. But from a fantasy perspective, Dalton Connect is a live play at 8,900 just because he has that 60-point upside. But other than that, I don't think I'm going to be using anybody in a 16-game slate.
Yeah, and it's easy to sit and look at the current iteration of the Vols and think that, Vescovi's, he's a secondary play, he's a role player. And, it was only like 2, maybe 3 years ago.
He was arguably their best player.
Yeah, he was the best guy, one of the tops in the SEC. Like it's so crazy to think about where he's been relegated to this role, and it's not as if he, forgot how to play. He's just not being utilized that well. But I could see him, man. This is like just that return to form in the tournament when they need him. It's maybe Dalton Knecht is in foul trouble. Maybe he's just being doubled. I don't know. There's going to be a spot in this tournament where Vescovi just hits like 4 or 5 triples, and everyone's like, "Whoa, where did this come from?" Like, man, he's been doing this.
It's always been yeah.
So, I really would love to see them go with, use those guards more. I mean, they also have physicality as well, but, don't have to have Knecht forcing a bunch of low efficiency shots. So we'll see if they actually end up doing that. And if they end up playing Purdue, that's going to be a fun matchup because they're going to have to rely on others besides Knecht, because Lance Jones is going to be draped all over him. All right, let's move on here to the next game. NC State versus Texas Tech. Total of 145.5. The Red Raiders are 5-point favorites. The Wolfpack, of course, made that legendary run through the ACC tournament, which kicked in a clause in Coach Keith's contract to give him a 2-year extension. Goes from likely being fired to now having 2 more years of employment at least. Wayne Tinkle, Patrick Ewing style. Why don't you start us off here? Love this Texas Tech team when Darian Williams is healthy and if they have Warren Washington, because I've had a lot of people ask me, like, DJ Burns, all this DJ Burns hype. It's like, well, if Warren Washington doesn't play, I see it. If he does, that might be a different story. So what do you think about this one?
Yeah, and that's the main storyline for this matchup too. It's what does the health of Texas Tech look like? I did see a tweet today, I forget who it was from, that both Williams and Washington are trending towards playing. Again, you know better than anybody else, Walt.
Yeah.
This is college basketball, so hard to trust anything until tip. But if that's the case, then I do like Texas Tech in this matchup. Mainly just because I think McCaslin can scheme just a much better game plan than Kevin Keatts can. But, this NC State team is hot. And Texas Tech, coming into the season, I thought we were going to play much slower under McCaslin, kind of like the North Texas days. But they've been playing pretty fast, and they have a dynamic backcourt between Toussaint and Pop Isaacs, where I do worry about them a little bit just because their shot selection at times is quite poor. But, this NC State team just got hot at the right time. They've been very inconsistent all year. If Washington is playing, then I agree with you. It takes away a lot of what DJ Burns can do. The question I have from a fantasy perspective in this matchup is that, this NC State team does have a pretty thin rotation, and there's 2 guys I'm very interested in, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on each of them. DJ Horn coming off the injury. He's finally healthy, so he did play a full game the last 2 games, but he's still way too cheap at 6,200. And then your guy, Mo Diarra, has been playing over 30 minutes and I think 4 or 5 straight, and has just been wreaking havoc in the fantasy streets with his block and rebound upside. How much interest do you have in those 2 guys? From the Texas Tech side, fully healthy, I don't think I can get to anybody, but from the NC State side, I do have interest in both those guys.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because like the Horn like coming into the ACC tournament and then getting healthy and starting, you just seem like, wow, this is a ridiculously cheap price for him. How could we not use him? Of course, he went completely ballistic. I think that it's going to be hard not to want to use him at that price, because we have to expect him to get back up to like 35, 36, 37 minutes. He's going to shoot 15 to 20 shots. We know he can facilitate a little bit. He's just the complete player for this team. And that price to me, regardless, the Texas Tech perimeter defense, it's got its inefficiencies. With Warren Washington, they're, kind of blocking the lane a little bit. It's not as exciting, but I think what happens is Horn just ends up getting to the foul line a ton here against this Texas Tech team. And if this game is close to the end and Horn gets those opportunities, it just seems like he will absolutely obliterate this price. And we're used to seeing him above 7K. I mean, there were points where he got up over like almost 9K, just like back in February. So 6'2" is just way too cheap. And I don't envision Texas Tech as being this supremely elite defense, even if they get everyone back. I mean, they definitely low front court and in the block, they can definitely get down. But Horn's just one of those guys who can take over a game at any time. So I'm on board with using DJ Horn for sure. And then when it comes to Mo Diarra, man, it like the pricing on him lately has been just like outlandish. Gone are the days of using him at 4.7, but he's finally. It didn't take long. I mean, he was developing and playing well, but the way he's just like getting to watch him grow up this year from start to finish, and now he's become such an elite option. He grabs every rebound. That guy's just got a knack for finding angles and just so powerful. If Warren Washington doesn't go, like I truly like Burns is going to do his thing, but Diarra is going to probably have like 20 rebounds. That's a legitimate thing. I don't know if he'll, how many points he'll score, putbacks, whatever, 9 or 10, but he's going to have a ton of rebounds in this spot here without Washington. With him, I think he'll still do his thing. And the fact that he can block shots with just reckless abandon, and the fact that guys like Isaacs and, Joey T, they're going to want to drive when they can, he's going to send those shots back. He's just, the guy is just impossible to score on at times when he's in the zone. We saw that in the game against Duke. He was just making life miserable for them. So he has that major stocks upside on top of his elite rebounding upside. And then if he scores 9, 10, 11 real points, you're talking about a true slate-breaking performance. I think people are still behind on DR. Like when he was cheap, people would start to use him because like, okay, here's a cheap guy, I'm going to use him. But I don't know that people fully understand just how good he's become. And if you haven't had a chance to watch any NC State games, really, like do yourself a favor and watch this one, or go watch them ESPN Plus on demand, because he is just ridiculously improved over the last like 2 months alone. So yeah, I'm fully on board with using both. I don't know that I would do the stack, but I was, wondering what you thought about how close this game would actually be. And if NC State was going to have one of those situations where they just pittered out, like Georgetown did after they made a run, or if they would go on a run like Oregon State. So if they're going to make a run, it's obviously going to be on the shoulders of Horn and Diarra. Obviously, O'Connell making some big shots. We know what Burns can do with guys like nigh unstoppable in the low block, setting up his post moves from 3-point line. What a ridiculous post move set and it works. And Jaden Taylor, who is kind of an unsung hero for this team lately. So yeah, on both of them. If I could only use one, I think it's Horn. Tournament guards, like how does Horn not shoot 20 plus times here, right? So
one thing I do want to mention though is Texas Tech ranked 258th nationally in offensive block rate, so they get blocked a ton. 258th.
Yeah, that's a good call out. That's a good call out. So man, because the drives, they're always trying to force those drives. Like, how many times you see Isaac's like 3 for 15 shooting, and it's like, oh, he must have had a bad night. Well, he's just trying to go in and draw fouls and throwing wild shots up.
He got blocked 3 times.
Yeah.
2 times, right? Yeah.
So yeah, it just sets up for a great spot there for him. And I especially like it, like I said, without Washington. I did see while you were talking, I was looking at videos, warm-up videos, of course, in the layup line and at practice, and he was dunking. So it seems like he's going to try to play, would have to, but clearly not 100% either way. But yeah, Diarra being a like, people know like what he's been putting up, but like I said, I don't think people click in their mind like, wow, this guy really can play, and he might still end up being a sneak even after all he's been doing. But that Horn play at 6'2" just seems like a main team play to me. On the Texas Tech side, I love Darian Williams, but not at 7'9", not being banged up, dealing with an ankle issue. Like, I'm just so worried he's going to go out there and be a decoy like he was against BYU at times after the injury. Just seems like it's impossible to use him. It's a damn shame, because we were using Darian Williams for the last like 2.5 months at 3% ownership, and he's just been churning out huge game after huge game. But he's a lot different with Warren Washington. A lot of those additional rebounds, blocks, and stuff that he gets disappear with Warren Washington back. So, and obviously Chance McMillan with those guys back would be a non-factor at 6'5". Sounds like we're mini stacking NC State. I know Alex is down with that. All right, next game here. We're making pretty good time, I must say. Samford versus Kansas. It's 153.5 total, nearly 154. The Jayhawks 7-point favorites. The big news that came out last night, and it seemed to me like it was very, read between the lines with Bill Self's interview there. Kevin McCullough is being shut down, and it's not a comment of, oh yeah, he tried to play, he can't go, it's terrible for him. But the normal thing you would think you'd hear, it was, he thinks he's too hurt to play. He says it hurts too much. He can't play. So it's a little bit of between the lines stuff there. Some accusing him, McCullough, of shutting it down because people said to get ready for the draft. Whatever, that doesn't really matter, but there's some turmoil there, it seems like, potentially. Kansas will have Hunter Dickinson. He's been practicing at full strength over the last 48 to 72 hours. I think that Samford obviously gives them a game. I didn't pick Kansas to lose this game. I do have them losing in the next one, though, as we talked about. And I think that Samford could easily easily cover this game and maybe even steal the win here, because Kansas just seems like all the wind taken out of their sails coming into the year. A lot of people, myself included, thought, well, that's an easy 1 seed. They're going to make the Final Four. Like, this team is legit. Injuries happened. They didn't get depth. Nick Timberlake was not as advertised. And, things happened with the injuries that just they couldn't come back from. They do get a 4 seed. I think they end up out of the tournament early. This game seems like a prime spot for Samford to take advantage. But at the same time, I feel like Hunter Dickinson's just going to throw down like a 60. So where is your head at for this one?
I think from a fantasy perspective, this is the game that you need to get right, because there's a lot of value here. As far as picking sides, I had the benefit of being in Asheville for the SoCon tournament, so I saw Samford play live twice. A Core or a Chor, I still don't know how to pronounce his name. He is an absolute beast. He is the real deal. But the rest of this team and the way that they play, you could tell that this is not a team that's built to beat a high major team. I know they played Purdue earlier in the year and got ran out of the gym, right? They're going to try to speed Kansas up. They don't really have positional size. The only size they have is at center. But a Core is still a little undersized for a center. He's more of a power forward body. So, I don't think that even without McCullough, I don't think that speeding Kansas up and giving them more possessions is going to be a way to beat them, if that makes sense. I just can't see them winning this game. But from a fantasy perspective, Samford plays a lot of guys, which is a little worrisome. They have a really deep rotation, but the total is 154, and they're going to get a lot of shots up. A Core is only 5,800. His rates are off the chart, especially more recently when he's been playing over 30 minutes, where he was playing more in the low 20s all year. And he's been putting up some massive fantasy stat lines. And, Kansas, Bill Self is a great coach, but, Hunter Dickinson isn't the greatest defensive center out there. So I do think a Core could have some success here. And then you have to look at guys like Rylan Jones. You have to look at a guy like Jermaine Marshall, even AJ Staten McCray at 4,000, just getting healthy. He played 20 minutes last game, but he was playing high 20s earlier in the season when he was starting. He's coming off an injury. But all these guys are in the 4K range, and picking the right one, I think, is going to be the key to unlocking the slate. Rylan Jones, I think, is going to be the chalkiest at 4,400, just because he's been consistently over 20 fantasy points, I think, in probably like 9 of his last 10. But at the same time, he's going to have DeJuan Harris following him around the whole game. So do you really trust him to have a good game? I don't know. Jermaine Marshall is probably the hugest foul risk on the entire slate, but the guy has incredible rates. And, Kansas's interior defense isn't the greatest. And then AJ Staten McCray, do we trust that he's going to get enough minutes coming off the injury? He only played 18 in the last game. He's probably going to come off the bench. So he's really, really cheap for his rates or in his ability, but minutes are a question mark. So finding the right combination or picking the right one of those guys, I think, is going to be the key to this slate. I'm curious to get your thoughts. I think the only guy I have locked in that I'm probably definitely going to be using a lot is a Core. But at the same time, I do worry about he's a potential foul risk as well. So I have worries there too. On the Kansas side, I agree with you that Dickinson is an incredible play even at that high price point. So, thinking about him or Shannon, if you have that kind of room in your salary, he's an incredible play there. But other than that, I think the role players, since they've been playing a lot recently, they're priced a little too high for my liking, even in a fast-paced game.
Yeah, even without McCullough there, like Murphy at almost 7K, he's gonna definitely knock down some threes against these guys, but it's just such a high price to pay for him. He disappears too much. He's young. KJ Adams played his ass off against Cincinnati, which has made his price way too high to use. Like next to Dickinson, it's just, he's just not going to get those looks. I almost just feel like it's going to be DeJuan Harris, who's a little pricey at 6'8" just feeding Hunter Dickinson like just relentlessly. That's why I think he's just such an amazing play, because he's gonna have, like, they're gonna put this one away like 30 real points. He doesn't, one thing about him, he doesn't like physicality, like unless he's delivering that physicality, like he gets in, people get into his head quite easily. He likes to portray himself as like this, never phased guy, but he does get rattled. And looking at this matchup, I'm kind of pleased to hear you say, I'm not sure the pronunciation either. Akora, we'll go with that. At 5'8", like he is physical. He doesn't mind. And like you said, you got a chance to watch them play. Hopefully he doesn't get a bad whistle, and there'll be some complaining from Dickinson. But if he's able to stay on the court for, he's played 32 minutes in the title game there, he's liable to put up a huge number, 40 plus at 5'8". And I think people might be a little bit, gun shy to maybe use him against Dickinson, because he does draw a lot of fouls, and these are going to be the underdog. Maybe they don't get the best whistle, but that was the first thing I thought of when this matchup came out. Like, he's going to be pushing Dickinson. He's coming off of injury. He's not going to like that very much. Maybe he gets rattled. Maybe Dickinson picks up the foul trouble instead. So I am definitely interested in him. The price on Ryland Jones is unfortunate. That means he's going to be really chalky, like you mentioned. He also has name value. People remember him from Utah and Utah State. He's just been the most consistent there. I think it's an interesting fade in large field GBPs for some of your alts. Survivor builds, single entry, that's just going to be a play. I think you're going to have to just going to have to play and deal with it. It is interesting for Staten McRae. Probably takes minutes directly from Dallas Graziano. Maybe they end up splitting more, or he just takes, puts him down to like 15, and maybe he plays 24, 25. Have some interest for GBP there, because like you said, in the first part of the season, he was playing a lot more, and his rates are actually pretty solid overall. Somebody who, if he were to get back in the starting lineup, for example, would come up higher in my overall player pool. He has a 28% shot rate, 43% free three-point shooter, and a 25.5% usage rate. So this is a very high usage guy when healthy, when starting. As far as anybody else, I like the Marshall call there. He has one of those guys who, minutes can be erratic, but he does have strong fantasy point per minute numbers. Not quite to Walker level today, like we saw in the play-in game, but he's somebody who at 4.7, maybe a little bit sneakier, just because people are going to pay down for Ryland Jones, or, up to a core not paying that 4.7 for Marshall. So you probably get some lower owned potential there, leverage in between. Looking at Samford on the initial projections, pretty much all of them outside of Graziano, the regular contributors, are all projecting well over 4x. So clearly they didn't get the pricing right on the Samford team. This is one of those spots, a mini stack of Samford, even if they lose, could definitely end up optimal. All right, that takes us to the final game here of the day, Drake versus Washington State. Drake comes in as 1.5 point favorites on DK, total of 138. You know the deal with Drake. Tucker DeVries, he is just incredible. One of the more expensive players on the slate at nearly 10K, but man, he can really fill it up. Gets those Braden Smith-esque lines. That's what I kind of started to call them, where he'll put up 20 points, 7 rebounds, 5-6 assists, just those really appealing stat lines. Dealing with a tougher matchup though in Washington State. I think a lot of people are just penciling in Drake to win here and get that second round matchup with Iowa State. I have done so as well, but I would be a liar to say I wasn't nervous about this Cougars matchup. So where are you at with this one?
From a fantasy perspective, I don't think I have anybody in this game in my player pool. Maybe I'll throw DeVries in one GVP lineup, and maybe I'll have maybe 2 Jalen Wells. But other than that, it's just too large of a slate in a game that has the potential to be more of a grind for me to get excited about anybody. From a side perspective, I think this is a really fun game. Like you said, I do see a lot of people on the Drake side. I'm on the Drake side too. But this Washington State team is no joke. I do think they overachieved a little bit this year in a weaker Pac-12 conference, but they're pretty good. They got a really good point guard in Miles Rice. Isaac Jones is a matchup problem. They got some shooting on the wing. They could pull this one off, but I do think that Drake has more experience. I think they have the best player on the court. They've been knocking on the door for an NCAA tournament win over the last few years. They almost pulled off Miami, I think it was last year. I just think that they pull it out. But from a fantasy perspective, this is most likely a pass for me.
Yeah, definitely. Cougars games didn't get involved in a lot this year unless they were playing like Stanford or Utah. Their games just tend to be kind of a grind, like you had mentioned. Jalen Wells does have appeal at that 6.2K price, especially if, he's several times this season, especially the last month or two, has been playing 38, 39 minutes. So that is pretty cheap for him and what he's going to do just from a sheer volume standpoint. And then there is some intrigue with younger players, but you can't actually use him. He's not cheap enough. But Isaiah Watts, this is a game, or at least if Washington State's going to win here, I feel like they could unleash him. He's a younger player that they're super jacked about. He was supposed to play more in the Pac-12 tournament, but Andrzej Jakimovski didn't end up being as injured as they thought, so it didn't quite work out for Watts. He did have a massive game against my Huskies. Instant offense. This is going to be a kid that we're talking about a lot next year. But from, I'm not going to get caught playing him this time, but just a lot of the Cougars beats writing that Watts is expected to get more burn, and they're going to look to him, especially if their offense starts out stagnant here against Drake. So don't be surprised if Watts gets some additional burn in this one, but it's a little bit high at 4.6 when you have everybody on Samford starting below 5K basically, except for one. And then DeVries at 10K. Like if he was playing Kansas, like that would be just a slam mode for me. But yeah, this matchup's just not so great. All right, we did it. We got through all 16 games. Feel like we have a pretty good handle on it. I've had several days to look it over. Let's talk about core, because there's a lot of different ways you can go on a 16-game slate. And it's probably going to be, I don't know that it's going to be super high scoring, but with the amount of games, there's going to be a high amount of variance, whether people want to admit that or not. There's just going to be guys who go off that nobody expected. There's going to be safe players that we all thought were locks. With that being said, where is your head at for top 2 or 3 players that you feel like you're going to be building, your primary builds around? If you're going to play the 2-2-2 or whatever, or even not Mania, don't talk about Mania, but, like you primarily a lot of your action, what are those players you're looking at?
For my favorite pay up,
there's so many names to look through. I mean, geez.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. You're good.
Your headphones died.
Okay.
For my favorite pay up, I have to go with Armando Bacot against this really, really small Wagner team. I know it's a big risk, but I have to stick to my guns. I always do this in the non-con, and it's been successful for me. So anytime I see a talented big with a massive size advantage, and it makes me a little more comfortable that it's a tournament setting. So I think they're going to feed him early and often. I am a little worried about Ingram stealing some of his rebounds, but we've seen Bacot for the last 3 years now have some really, really high upside games at 8,200. He's probably my favorite pay up. And then if you want to go lower down the price pool, I do think a core can have his way against an injured Dickinson at 5,800. And so those are the 2 guys I'm really building around in my lineups.
Yeah, I think, it's such a great move in the non-con to take those, bigger front court players are just way stronger. And Bacot has this massive experience. Like there's just nothing that's going to catch him by surprise. Right. And it would be wise for them to get him started early so that confidence carries over into what will become a tougher second round, tougher Sweet 16, et cetera, et cetera. And there'll be games where they just, like RJ Davis has to carry if they're going to make this run and get to the Final Four. Like there's going to be the game that RJ Davis just like hits every shot, Marcus Page-esque. But this is a great one to get some confidence for Armando Bacot. And he's gone through it. Like I think just playing for North Carolina, like if you have weird seasons or games, like you're under so much scrutiny, right? And it'd be a great idea for them to just load him up here early. All right, so for me, core play number 1, and probably going to be popular, but like whatever, it's just sometimes it's that easy. Marcus Deshonis at 6'3". I wanted it to be a sneakier play because of the fact that it's, a team that's, 20 points or more as a dog. You had mentioned, regular players wouldn't be fooled by that. And that's probably true because that's 6'3" price for him. And even if they lose by 20, scoring like 80 points, he's going to be a big reason why. And there's just no way he doesn't shoot 20 plus shots. They might not be the most efficient shots, but they're going to be 20 plus shots. And then the other core that I'd be looking at here, I do really like the core play. Like that's one that I would probably start to really gravitate towards. I'm really high on this Akron upset against Creighton. So if that's going to happen, I need to have exposure there. And I think because of all of these variety of mid-range plays, it's going to make some really good options like Ali just not be that owned. Not because he's not a good play, just because people are going to either overlook him or they just can't fit him because of where they're going to go. So he'd be the second core for me at 6.1K and one of the catalysts for the upset over Creighton. So that's going to be the main two-guy core for me. And then I just say Rylan Jones is a third because as a cheapie, he's just the one that I think you have to play in set single entry. And people might be confused because I say I never want to play a guy because of ownership only, but that applies to 7K, 8K type of guys. When you have a 4.4K guy with P5 experience playing 30 plus minutes, I'm happy to eat that chalk. I'm fine with that. All right. So that finishes the slate. I do want to pull up a couple of prize picks here. And then before we go, if you could maybe give one or two props that you're looking at for the viewers here, and then we'll skedaddle on out of here. We're making excellent time for us. So let me pull up these fan prize picks. I suspect they're probably got everything that they're going to have in. Well, that's good. Usually we get stuff in the morning slates, but the first one, Shahada Wells, is fantasy prop at 32.5. I'm just bought in on it. I feel like, there might be an opportunity here for Anton Watson to make life, hell. We saw him at TCU struggle with some of these upper tier defenses, but that volume for him is just going to lead to a lot of fantasy goodness. The steals on there are 3 points. That is something that he is
that's
going
an easy
to rack up. So that over 32.5 just seems like that's the primary one for me. Dylan Dessous sits there at 30.5 fantasy points. That also, I had to come back to that one because if he's not going to be in foul trouble, like Mike said, he's just going to be able to dominate. So have to look at that one over 30.5 as well. And then one more here. Go to the points. Just want to make sure it didn't change. Sometimes they do that. So it's a goblin play. They have these demon plays that are higher and they pay more, and goblins which are lower, they pay less. But they have a Tulu Smith discounted prop at 9.5 points. I do like him to score at least 10, right, against this Michigan State team. So we'll go over 9.5 points for Tulu Smith. All right. So that brings us to the very end. I see Raz very excited about Jalen Wells there. Guessing that is who helped you win one of your seats. So before we head out, what's a prop that you could give the viewers there that they can go after? I know that the FTN bets, if you're not a member already, definitely want to look at signing up for that for the rest of the tournament. Mike is up a ridiculous amount of units. It's like 1.5 million, and he has had just an incredible season. And he definitely was a good influence on me. He got me away from PRAs, which was a losing proposition. I appreciate that. With that being said, what prop are we looking at here on day one?
Yeah, only sometimes, Walt. Sometimes PRAs are okay, but not all the time.
For sure.
You're just increasing your variance if you're doing them all the time. But I'll give out a few.
Okay. I was hoping you would. I didn't want to put you on the spot or make you give it up, but I appreciate it.
I think my favorite one for I guess the next 2 days is Kyle Filipowski over 15.5. Vermont is a very post-funnel defense, and they have a banged-up front court. Don't know how healthy Veretto is. They have nobody who can guard him underneath. They're not the greatest rebounding team, so I think it's tournament time, so I think Duke's going to rely on Filipowski a lot. 15.5 is too low. I think they should be more like 17.5, so I like over 15.5 for Kyle Flip. I do like Tolu Smith. I think it opened at 12.5. Even I think it may be up to 13.5 now, but I still like it. I think that Mississippi State uses him a lot against that weak Michigan State front court. And then there's two guys that have high point totals, but I think they're going to be used just an incredible amount in this first round games. Number one is Boo Buie against the FAU drop coverage. His number is 19.5, but I think he's going to take like 25 shots in this first game. And then Wade Taylor against Nebraska. So we know Nebraska really struggles to defend the perimeter. Terrence Shannon just went for 40 against them the other night. I think Wade Taylor can have a similar type of game against Nebraska. So those are the guys that I like.
Love it. Yeah, Wade Taylor. I'm a pretty big Wade Taylor fan in general. When I saw that matchup, I thought, wow, that has the potential to be a legendary performance there. All right, I think that's a good spot for us to end, Mike. I appreciate it. It's become a tradition for us to hang out and break down the day one slate together. Lots of games to watch over the next few days. I know your schedule is busy, but maybe we can get you on next week for Sweet 16 action. But you're obviously welcome anytime you want to come on. I always love having you on, and you give us a different element to look at with all the games that you watch. I always tell people, like, you can get into the numbers and look at all that and Ken Palm, and that's great, and you should, but like, there's really no substitute for watching games and seeing what teams are doing in certain situations so that you can speak to that. And you'll know, like, hey, when this happened, this guy got a foul. Here's who they used. Here's the defense they switched to, or you picked up on the zone defense that, certain team is starting to play. Like that. That's just huge stuff that can give you an advantage over somebody who just, only looks at numbers, or the same token, only watches games and might miss something, else in the numbers. A good blend of both. So I always appreciate your analysis and look forward to following your journey through the mania here as you bring it home for the FTN network and the good guys.
I appreciate that, Walt. I appreciate you. That's a great point. The only way you're going to get really good at this stuff is by watching the games. You can't just follow along with box scores on your phone. It's not going to get it done. It's not enough. You really have to, in order to understand how these teams, these coaches, these players really, how things are really going to shake out, you have to watch the games. And then mixing in advanced statistics on top of that is really where you can really dive into some fun stuff. So it's a really good point. But yeah, love being on your show. Love talking hoops with you. It's one of my favorite things. Thanks again for having me on. Best of luck to you, sir. I'll be praying tomorrow in the Mania. I got a tough matchup with Ham Hock. He's also an FTN sub, a great fantasy player. So I have my hands full with him tomorrow, but we'll see what kind of luck I can come up with. And if not, then we'll just be sweating out props all day. So
there we go. At the end of you'll be profitable one way or another. I know that for sure. I appreciate everybody who has tuned in tonight and continues to do so over the next couple of days as we fight our way through the first round. Please make sure on your way out you hit that like button if you haven't already, and we'll be back tomorrow night, same time, same place on the Super Show. Take it easy. Good luck, and see you guys later.